After an 8-year wait since the last big Bethesda RPG, well, their last big single-player RPG anyway, last September saw the much-anticipated release of Starfield. The hype was enormous. The studio, famous for creating some of the most fun, big open worlds to explore, was making a game in the biggest, most open world of them all, space. But the passage of time has not been kind to the public perception of Starfield. What caused this dramatic change of public opinion? Let's check the game out and see if we think it's deserved. The game starts and we're a miner loading 16 tons. What do we get? We get told by our boss to grab a weird thing they found while digging. Touching it gives us a strange vision and knocks us out. After waking up, our coworkers make sure we're healthy by letting us do character creation. The character creator is alright, though I tend not to care too much about my custom character's appearance in single-player games, and doubly so for first-person single-player games where you don't see your character's face much outside of the many getting out of the pilot seat animations. You also get to pick a background, which is one of the least impactful class choices I've ever seen in an RPG. It gives you 3 unlocked rank 1 skills, equivalent to 3 levels worth of perk points, and will very occasionally give you a special speech option, or so I've been told. I picked cyberneticist as my background, and I genuinely can't remember a single time I got a speech option based on that. It basically amounts to a very small head start for a few skills in the very early game. This game also sees traits with both positive and negative aspects making an appearance. Some of them mainly affect combat, like the empath trait that gives you a temporary combat buff or debuff when you do something your follower likes or dislikes. Others focus mainly on roleplay and utility, like the dream home trait that starts you off with a nice house, but also a hefty mortgage you need to make payments towards. No complaints here, this is a solid addition to character creation. I just wish there were more of them to choose from, and that they were more impactful, especially since you can remove any of them if you decide they aren't for you. After making a character, we head outside for one of those classic Bethesda moments where you leave the underground and see the vast open world for the first time. Except with those other moments, you got your first glimpse of the world you would spend the rest of the game exploring, while here, it's just the barren landscape of a random moon you leave minutes later. The reason we went outside was to meet the guy buying the weird thing we found. His name's Barrett, and he's from a group of explorers called Constellation. We have a chat, and let's take this opportunity to talk about conversations. If you compare them to Bethesda's other titles, they fall somewhere between the awkward zoom-in with a paused background of Oblivion and Fallout 3, and the more immersive one from Skyrim. Though I'd say it ends up closer to Oblivion since every conversation is from the same flat frontal shot. Really the only contribution from Skyrim is the fact that the world isn't paused, though I suspect the AI is set to passive for enemies when you're in a conversation because I never had a conversation interrupted by combat, even when I feel like it should have been. Take this conversation that took place next to some aggressive aliens, where one just walked up behind the person I was talking to and looked over her shoulder the entire time. Now obviously I can't know for sure, but I suspect this system is designed to prevent funny business like this from happening and ruining their dramatic moments. Another indicator of this is that you often can't start a conversation with someone when they're doing an animation. It'll just play a little error sound effect and you have to wait for them to stop, even if it's something really minor like leaning on a table. Probably to stop things like this from happening.
I've been meaning to thank you for helping me with the Crimson Fleet before. I could have handled it myself, of course, but it's good working with a team.
Our chat with Barrett is interrupted by some pirates that followed him. Fighting these pirates is our first taste of combat, and if you've played Fallout 4, it should look pretty familiar. Enemies have good AI by Bethesda standards, and will take cover or even flee if things aren't going their way. Early on, most weapons feel pretty weak, like this dinky little pistol we start out with, but as we play the game and level up, we start getting our hands on some heavier artillery that feels pretty satisfying to use. One of the main complaints I've seen about the combat is that enemies are bullet sponges with too much health. Now I personally never had this problem, but I think it's caused by the game's confusing level scaling systems that I'm still not sure I fully understand, but I'll try to explain as best I can. Before I begin, I should say I play the game on normal difficulty, so this might be different for higher difficulties. This has some layers, so let's start with enemies. Star systems have a level, and enemies found in that system will generally be around that level, unless it's for a mission, in which case the enemies will scale to your level. Or at least that's what I've heard. In my experience, it's inconsistent. Some enemies will scale to a higher level, while others will stay at level 1, even in New Game Plus with a high level character. But that's not where the scaling ends. Weapons also scale, and in a way that isn't immediately apparent. Weapons in Starfield have more in common with weapons in the Elder Scrolls than Fallout, with 4 quality tiers that increase the damage they deal, sorta like how a steel sword in Skyrim deals more damage than an iron sword. Except in the Elder Scrolls and most other RPGs, you can actually tell if a weapon is made of a better material just by looking at it. whereas in Starfield, there is no visual indicator of what tier a weapon is. The only indicators you have are the raw damage numbers and an adjective before its name, which can easily be missed among the other adjectives put there by traits and mods. Imagine you're playing Skyrim, but every sword looks like a steel sword, and instead of having glass, ebony, and daedric swords, you have sharp sword, real sharp sword, and super sharp sword. That would feel a bit worse, wouldn't it? But at least then it will be pretty clear which ones are better than the others, whereas it isn't as obvious which is more powerful when comparing a bashing commander's advanced Grendel to a hand-loading modified calibrated Grendel. Oh, and if you thought you could use a weapon workbench to improve a weapon to a higher tier, like calibrating a Grendel and turning it into a calibrated Grendel, you can't. I know making weapon models must be a lot of work, but having different models for different weapon tiers would probably go a long way towards making the progression feel more apparent and satisfying. Weapons can also have traits, like in Fallout 4 and 76, that put 1 to 3 random effects on the gun depending on gun rarity. These vary from worthless ones like extra damage when pistol whipping to pretty good ones like exploding bullets. However, I found none of these traits to be as impactful as the added damage of a higher tier weapon. Also, much like the tier of the weapon, you can't control which trait a gun will have, or add traits you want to a gun you have, you just need to get lucky. While it's possible to grind for a really good 3-trait weapon by save scumming and repeatedly killing an enemy that drops these until you get your perfect weapon, doing so is pretty pointless. The game is really easy. A flawless tier weapon with no trait is good enough to wipe the floor with any enemy, and it's not like you're going after a pink parse on Starfield logs, so getting that perfect weapon would be very tedious and ultimately pointless. But if the game's so easy, why do bullet sponge enemies come up so often? Well, if you don't know how all these systems work, things can go very wrong. Players in the early game will get an epic or even legendary gun with some good traits that feel nice and strong, so they continue using them blissfully unaware that as they level, so do the enemies they fight, while their awesome weapon stays the same, essentially making that nice weapon weaker and weaker as time goes on. And you could be forgiven for missing the fact that the awesome legendary you got a couple hours back is now worse than the generic guns dropped by random enemies just because their names say advanced instead of calibrated. Also, some weapons are just crap. You can have a max tier legendary solstice with all the best upgrades in every slot and all the relevant skills at max level, be completely outclassed by a basic factory standard Big Bang with no relevant perks. In fact, upgrading your weapons and armor are the real ways you increase your power in Starfield. I'll talk about it more soon, but leveling doesn't increase your power nearly as much as just getting better equipment. If you want to kind of break the game early on, get the power that disarms enemies, go to a high level system, and use it to snag some of their advanced tier guns. You'll absolutely mop the floor with your low level enemies. Speaking of levels, how does leveling actually work for the player? It's kinda like a simplified version of Fallout 4 haunted by the phantom of the skill-based progression from the Elder Scrolls games. XP and levels work a bit like in Fallout with the special system removed, but still very different. Most activities provide XP, and when you level, you get a skill point, a bit of HP, and seemingly nothing else. To quote StarfieldWiki.net, it is unclear if leveling has any other effects outside of skills and health. Those skill points can then be used to unlock your skills, which either gives you a new ability or improves your stats in some way. It's also possible to put multiple points in the same skill for a high rank of the skill, but investing multiple points into a skill requires completing a challenge to unlock the higher level, which is the aspect of skill-based progression I mentioned earlier. Some are logical, simple challenges, like killing enemies with laser weapons to unlock a higher rank of the laser skill, while others make a bit less sense, like killing enemies with a non-automatic weapon to level up armor penetration. Many of them are also really annoying to level up, like spaceship design, where you have to install several dozen unique ship modules to unlock the skill, letting you install the modules you actually want, with similar challenges for the skills unlocking armor and weapon mods. The game also doesn't let you know what the challenge is before unlocking the first rank, and it only starts tracking progress after you unlock that first rank. So I spent most of the game killing ships without unlocking any piloting skills, only to have those kills not count for the challenge when I wanted to level piloting. And if after that I had wanted to level up Aneurotic Fusion or Ship Command, those also require you to kill ships to unlock the higher ranks, but the kills that unlocked piloting wouldn't have counted for them, so I would have had to grind it out again. Also, I know single-player games don't need to be perfectly balanced, but there are over 3 times as many ballistic guns as all other types of gun combined. If you want to tailor your class around your gun, you're gonna want perks that amplify both the damage type and the weapon type, but picking any damage type other than ballistic means limiting yourself to 1 or 2 weapon choices if you also want the extra damage from the weapon type perk. Like if you want to build your character around laser rifles, there are only 2 laser rifles to choose from. Meanwhile, if you build your character around ballistic rifles, you have 14 to choose from. Was designing ballistic weapons that much more fun that they just forgot about all the other types? Now where were we? Oh right, pirates. After defeating them, Barrett explains that the thing we touched is called an artifact, and that he wants us to come with him to Constellation because of the vision we had. Our boss is not happy about this, but Barrett offers to stay in our place so we can go. She accepts and we fly off in his ship, with its robot Vasco there to ensure we don't just steal it. Once in space, we get attacked by some pirates, and after destroying their ships, Vasco decides we need to take out their base to, I guess, prevent them from following us. But after we clear out their base, we go straight to New Atlantis, and the trip is over in seconds. New Atlantis' orbit is also crawling with guard ships, so there was never any actual danger of being pursued, making the whole adventure pointless. Once we land, we head to Constellation's headquarters in New Atlantis. New Atlantis looks really good. A futuristic, fully walkable city with a working public transportation system and not a car in sight. Truly peak city planning that would have Robert Moses spinning in his grave hard enough to affect the rotation of the Earth. It's the capital of the United Colonies, or UC, one of the game's main factions and the one that seems the most like a normal modern nation on the surface, though there is one significant exception to that which we'll talk about a bit later. We go into Constellation's headquarters, called the Lodge, and meet some more of the group. They bicker back and forth, asking us about our vision, until telling us to put the artifact next to the two they already have. This causes them to levitate and make particle effects appear. Everyone is very excited by this, so they invite us to join Constellation on the spot. The people present are Walter, their rich sponsor, Noel, a scientist, and Mateo, whose job is to suggest a supernatural explanation for things we don't yet understand. He's a bit like those people that see a Jesus-shaped scorch mark on a piece of toast and think it's proof of divine intervention. Lastly, we have their leader Sarah, who joins us as our first story follower on a mission looking for more artifacts, a theme for much of the main quest. But what do I mean by story follower? There are a lot of followers in this game. Most of them work like the followers in Skyrim, where they may have a quest you need to do to recruit them, but once that's done, their part in the story is over. The 4 story followers, on the other hand, work more like a middle ground between the followers in Fallout 4 and your crew members from the Mass Effect games. They will often chime in during conversations and are major players in the main quest, like Sarah is for this quest. This is also when the intro ends and we're free to explore as we please, and I like how the main quest lacks urgency so far. The artifacts have been out there for a long time, and as far as we know, they aren't going anywhere. So even if you're playing a character that wants to find the artifacts, it doesn't feel weird that you get sidetracked for extended periods of time. You don't have a chip in your head that's slowly killing you, and your son hasn't been kidnapped, so there's no rush. Back in the story, the search for the artifact takes us to Commander Tuala of the UC Vanguard, one of the game's joinable factions. He says one of his guys in the Sol system found something matching the description of an artifact, but before we go looking for that, let's get sidetracked by the Vanguard questline. Tuala gives us a brief description of the faction. They're a volunteer navy working for the UC in exchange for citizenship. We sign up and get taken on a tour through the Vanguard Museum history exhibit, explaining a lot of the setting's background. We learned that Earth was gradually losing its atmosphere and turning uninhabitable, so the UC was established to evacuate the whole planet. It then goes into the 2 breakaway factions that left the UC, House Varun, a snake-worshipping theocracy that doesn't play a big role in the game, and the Freestar Collective, a group of independent colonies that join together for mutual defense. They and the UC are the game's most significant factions. The tour then moves on to describe some historical conflicts, but the only one that really matters much is the Colony War, fought between the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective. Fighting raged across many worlds, with both sides using devastating mechs and bioengineered alien xenoweapons until a Freestar victory in space won them the war. The armistice that followed outlawed both mechs and xenoweapons for both sides. I can see why they would ban xenoweapons as too inhumane or dangerous, but why ban mechs? Does adding a pair of legs to a tank really make it that much more dangerous? And why hasn't anyone started building tanks after the treaty? Another stipulation of the armistice was that the USC put some of their military commanders on trial for war crimes, which ended with 3 of them being executed. Then we learn a bit about how citizenship works in the UC, which brings up more questions than it answers.
No one is born a United Colony citizen. Only through service to the UC can one hope to earn one's citizenship.
But wait, the recruiter told us,
and put in your time and you're guaranteed UC citizenship and everything that comes with it. Discounts on UC goods and medical services, chance to own a place in New Atlantis.
And the tour even confirms it.
And only UC citizens have the opportunity to purchase property, getting the chance to live in one of the most beautiful cities in the settled systems.
Does that mean every person living in New Atlantis served in the military? I would not have guessed that. Many of them don't seem the military type. Maybe they're allowed to rent? But the tour implies that only citizens can live in New Atlantis, period, so who knows? Anyway, after the tour we have to pass an exam in their space combat simulator, so let's briefly talk about space combat. It's pretty basic and felt a bit like me and the enemy were jousting knights, charging each other while shooting until we passed each other, turned around, and did it again. I don't know if there was some advanced strategy I was missing, but my way worked well enough that I was able to win almost every dogfight I got into. And I spent a large chunk of the game in a flying budget space semi-truck called the Econohaul, with no points in any space combat perks, though I will remind you I played on normal difficulty. Also, many space combat encounters can easily and even unintentionally be skipped because most random encounters take a few seconds to spawn in after you arrive in orbit around a planet. But when you're going to a planet, it's usually because you're going to the surface, and if you open up the planet screen, it pauses the game until you land, meaning you'll be gone by the time the enemy arrives. We passed the simulator test with only a passing grade, since acing the test seems borderline impossible without exploits. We then head back to the commander, swear an oath, and get sent on our first mission delivering some spare parts to a meatpacking plant out in the middle of nowhere. Exciting stuff. Once we get there, we find that, in an ironic twist, the workers at the meatpacking plant have themselves been slaughtered. After some searching, we find the only survivor, Hadrian. She's not one of the workers, but a researcher investigating rumors of a terramorph. They were briefly mentioned in the history tour, an alien race as dangerous as they are creatively named. They even attacked the UC city called Londinian and managed to overrun all the odd geezers defending it before the UC fleet destroyed the city spaceport to stop them from spreading. One of these is what killed the colonists, and Hadrian wants us to kill it. No one knows how they spread, but terramorphs always appear on worlds that have been colonized for a few decades, but this colony isn't old enough for that. So she wants a tissue sample from the terramorph to study and find out what caused this one to appear so soon. Moving through the dead facility has some great atmosphere, and we get our first view of the monster when we activate a system to track it, and it just annihilates this Ankylosaurus-looking alien. While its name might be heavily inspired by a certain other science fiction monster, the design is not, looking more like a writhing mass of long spindly arms than the streamlined latex-clad dick that is the xenomorph. The systems in the plant let us track the terramorph and turn on some turrets to help us, but our greatest ally is the lacking melee AI, which struggles to follow when we jump around with a jetpack. We fell the beast and bring the sample back to Hadrian, but she can't analyze it properly with the equipment at the plant, so she sends us to Mars to find a Dr. Walker to give it a proper analysis. This takes us to the city of Sidonia, an underground mining town supplying Mars's orbital shipyards with raw materials. Most of the people there are miners, and their living conditions are pretty bad. Its worn-out, run-down look provides a nice contrast with the more futuristic, utopian design of New Atlantis. After some busy work, we find the doctor, and his analysis of the sample is concerning. The sample matches those taken from the attack on Londinian, but shows no sign of having been transported on a ship. That means it was homegrown at the meatpacking plant, and implies that attacks like Londinian might start happening more often. After meeting back up with Hadrian, she decides we need more data on the terramorphs that was sealed away when xenoweapons were banned after the colony war. She also reveals how she's so knowledgeable about all this. She and Dr. Walker were part of the UC's xenoweapons division during the war, and were discharged after their division was shut down as part of the armistice. In order to get the data from the archive, we need to get all the armistice signatories on board with letting us in there, but she's skeptical she can even get the UC to agree. At least the cabinet leading the UC has agreed to meet us, so we go to New Atlantis for the meeting. Also, the archive containing all this data is in New Atlantis, which seems strange. Wouldn't a neutral location have been better? Or even Aquila City since the Freestar Collective won the war? Before the meeting, Hadrian also lets us know that she's a clone of the admiral that led the UC forces during the colony war, nicknamed Vae Victus. He was one of the UC military leaders that was executed for war crimes after the war. Some changes were made in the cloning process though. The original Vae Victus was a guy. This whole plot point seems kinda pointless. Her being a clone doesn't really add anything that her being his daughter wouldn't have. So we brief the cabinet, including the president, on the situation, and whatever they decide, they're interrupted by an emergency alarm. Terramorphs have attacked the spaceport, and we're the only ones experienced with them available. On the way there, we encounter the ironic sight of some cops getting the crap beaten out of them by ordinary civilians, when usually it's the other way around. They're victims of a new ability these terramorphs have, the ability to make people go berserk and attack each other. We're given a non-lethal EM weapon, and Hadrian warns us we might need to knock out some of their thralls before attacking the terramorphs. Then, seconds later, as we arrive at the spaceport, she says, "You know what? Fuck that non-lethal shit, just start blasting."
Race, Captain! Stash the EM and pull some firepower! Let's move!
And you know what? She's right. This is the first and only time the terramorphs ever use this ability. We never have to use that EM gun ever again. Other than that little strangeness, this sequence is pretty great. I did this questline pretty late in the game, and seeing the New Atlantis spaceport I had traveled through dozens of times, locked down, on high alert, and littered with dead and dying security officers, was pretty cool. though this moment is lessened somewhat by something in another quest that we'll talk about a bit later. We get to the spaceport and find that the UC mall cops have set up a perimeter around the terramorphs on one of the landing pads, so we head up there and finish them off. The melee AI once again makes this feel a bit less threatening than it probably should. On a repeat playthrough, I also noticed the terramorphs made us hear voices in our heads while fighting them, which didn't happen on my first playthrough. It might have been bugged, but I think I just killed them too fast for it to happen. We report back to the President after Cyrus finished running into this wall, and the cabinet have suddenly changed their minds. Now they're all in favor of getting the data from the archives. But to unlock the archives, they need 2 sets of code from both the other factions, the Freestar Collective and House Varun. We're put in charge of getting those, while Hadrian is reinstated into the military and tasked with investigating the terramorphs. The codes can only be provided by the faction ambassadors. The Varun embassy is more interesting visually with their snake motifs and a tree that sprays us with LSD. Meanwhile, the Freestar embassy is more plain, but has more options for acquiring the code. With the codes in hand, we get the data, hand it over to Hadrian, and are rewarded with a UC citizenship. We're also told there's someone with information that can help, but we have to swear to secrecy before meeting them. There's no decision to be made here though, refusing just pauses the questline until we change our minds. After heading into a vault in the basement, we meet the mystery man, and it's Victus, the admiral the UC executed for war crimes. Turns out they thought he was too valuable and faked his death. He's been working with them to bring in other war criminals since then, and has even found Adrian's old research team, but won't give us that info before we do him a favor. That favor is killing one of his old comrades, a mech researcher called Orlays, who ignored his court summons after the war. Victus is very insistent we kill him, but if we have an EM weapon or the targeting skill, we can disable his ship and try taking him alive. It won't work, he'll kill himself before you can arrest him, but it's nice they remembered boarding as a thing. Other times it seems they kinda forgot about boarding. Like here, where I got an event where the sister of someone I killed attacked me to try and get revenge. I disabled her engines and boarded, expecting a firefight, but when I got to the cockpit, she wasn't hostile. Sensing an awkward situation, I left and she let me go without issue. When we return, Victus tells us he's already sent all the members of the team to Hadrian, except one, Kaiser the robot, who's MIA in an old colony war battlefield on the world of Nira. And it's one of the best areas in the game. It was the site of one of the biggest battles of the war, with Xena weapons, mechs, and conventional troops deployed in force by both sides. Now the place is a mech graveyard, with the feral descendants of the original Xena weapons prowling the valleys between the rusting war machines, fighting the mercenaries scavenging the wrecks. But remember how I gave them credit for not ripping off the xenomorph design from Alien? I take it back. Also, the atmosphere is diminished somewhat if you happen to arrive during the day. Maybe it should be scripted so that the player always arrives at night. The improved atmosphere would be well worth it. It's here we find Kaiser, who looks and sounds a bit like the Gigachad version of Vasco.
Standard procedure would be a frontal assault on the outpost. No quarter given. Do you concur?
Wish he was a companion. We repair some of the damage he sustained, and after helping him finish his mission of decommissioning the last of the original Xena weapons, he agrees to come with us to the research base. When we return, we're briefed on the 2 possible solutions the team has come up with to deal with the terramorphs. The first is to boot up Plague Inc. and design a bioweapon that specifically targets and kills terramorphs. The other option is to bring back a previously thought to be extinct, but actually just critically endangered animal called the Asiles that looks a bit like a mix between a dinosaur and a giant parrot, which used to hunt and eat terramorphs but was docile to humans. They only have the resources to pursue one of these options, but whichever one they pick, they'll need samples from both terramorphs and Asiles, which can only be found in one place, Londinium, the city overrun with terramorphs, which Hadrian theorizes could be both species' homeworld. We meet Hadrian at the heavily fortified UC Marine outpost at the outskirts of Londinium. The base commander briefs us on what to expect in the city. Terramorphs everywhere, buildings unstable from the fighting and years of decay, and no backup. She's not risking her troops for us. Once we go inside, we're on our own. She does provide us with plenty of ammo and a really sick looking set of pretty good armor. Most armor in this game is ugly as hell, either looking like current day spacesuits or big bulky fat suits, whereas this looks like something a futuristic military might actually wear. Once we're suited up, we leave the safety of the outpost and go into the dead city. And once again, I have to heap praise on the environment because Londinium looks great. An abandoned city covered in ice with dilapidated buildings, including the chain restaurants and shops we see in other cities. It does a good job of selling this as the Metro 2033 version of New Atlantis. The mission itself is a bit of a letdown though, partially because of the issues with melee enemy AI that I've mentioned before, and partially because this place was built up like it was the colony from Aliens, with swarms of terramorphs attacking us relentlessly as soon as we set foot outside the perimeter, when in reality, we fight about a half dozen of their alien animal collaborators and a grand total of 4 terramorphs, including the end boss. And the end boss is nothing to write home about either. It's just a bigger Terramorph with the same moveset as all the other ones. Oh no, not the Screech attack that shakes the screen and barely does any damage. It tries summoning its lesser animal minions, but I actually killed it before any of them showed up, which made the walk away a little awkward with me having to walk past a large herd of now docile animals. Not exactly what I would call
One of the most dangerous places in the Milky Way.
hell, Nira felt more dangerous than this place. During the course of the mission, we have to take a detour through some tunnels where we find the Lazarus plant, a unique plant that only grows on Londinian along with a bunch of heat leeches, a pest found all over the game that ship technicians complain about relentlessly. As we move through the tunnels, we even find some blooming Lazarus plants and discover that its pollen is like heat leech trembolone, capable of instantly roiding them out and turning them into terramorphs. A tissue sample from the terramorph we saw transform matches the ones from both New Atlantis and the meatpacking plant, confirming that they were transformed by the plant. But according to Hadrian, it can only grow on this planet, meaning it's likely someone saw what it could do and intentionally used it to trigger the attacks, especially when you consider how convenient the timing of the attack on New Atlantis was. We get the final piece of the puzzle when we play a recording from when the spaceport was bombed. The Marines defending it had discovered what the plant could do and relayed it to their commander, Vae Victus. He then ordered all of them into the spaceport and blew it up from orbit to ensure everyone else that knew would die. We can choose to reveal he's still alive to Hadrian at this point when it's pretty clear that he's the one to blame for the attacks. We can actually tell her earlier before we retrieved Kaiser, but that plays out the same as telling her now, and most of the dialogue is the same. She's understandably a bit shocked, and after we get back to the base, she wants us to confront him with this evidence. When we do, he fully spills the beans. He was behind both the attack on the meatpacking plant and the one on New Atlantis. He had his co-conspirator Orlace, the guy he sent us out to kill, cause the first attack to get us and Hadrian to start investigating. He then caused the second attack to force the cabinet to take the threat seriously, and finally reprogrammed Kaiser to lead us to the Lazarus plant and solve the mystery. His motive? He was trying to redeem his and his clone daughter Hadrian's reputation by solving the crisis. He would get more influence in the UC government and maybe even let out of his goon cave after some cosmetic surgery, while Orlace would be the patsy taking all the blame. He obviously wants us to keep this quiet. His argument is that if it wasn't for him masterminding this whole situation, we'd just be a nobody Vanguard pilot patrolling the ass into nowhere, so we should be grateful. Oh right, remember the Vanguard? This really is their questline in name only, huh? Once we finish talking to him, we head to debrief the cabinet and get the three big choices of this questline. Whether to eliminate the Terramorphs using the Asylees or the micro bioweapon, whether or not we want to reveal that Vae Victus was behind it all, and finally what to do about the Lazarus plant. Regarding the first choice, the Asylees is described as the safe choice, since microbes can mutate and the potential consequences of that could be disastrous, albeit extremely unlikely. Other than that, the microbe is the faster, more efficient choice that doesn't require us to reintroduce megafauna into every population center in the galaxy. So the choice is whether you want to play it safe or go with the better, but potentially riskier option. However, there's an epilogue for the factions at the end of the game, and the one for the Vanguard says there is no mutation if you go with a microbe, making it the objectively superior choice. This is reinforced by all four story followers telling us that bringing the Asylees back was stupid if we go with that option. Though I think Sam was peer pressured into believing that, since he dislikes us expressing our preference for the microbe in an earlier conversation. As for spilling the beans on Vae Victus, if we reveal the truth, the cabinet's pissed, cutting off his contact with the outside world along with further unspecified punishment. If we hide the truth, he becomes a quest giver for Radiant quests where we track down and eliminate other war criminals. And finally, the cabinet wants to put the Lazarus plant under heavy guard with its transformation capabilities being kept secret. But you can convince them to exterminate it instead, just to be on the safe side. They then make us a Class 1 citizen, which gives us a discount at all UC stores as well as a free skyscraper penthouse apartment. This is a neat reward for the end of a long quest line, but I'm left questioning the UC system of government if they not only have a large population of resident non-citizens, but also a higher rank of citizen, essentially making most of the UC citizens population second-class citizens. I would make the obvious comparison to Starship Troopers, but this is worse than that. In the Starship Troopers novel, I'm pretty sure the only benefits to being a citizen is the right to vote and run for public office. Non-citizens are definitely allowed to own a home, and there aren't multiple tiers of premium citizenship. This would make some sense if the UC was this super militarized society, but it really isn't. And that's the end of the Vanguard questline. All that's left after this is Radiant quests that I don't even know why they bother making. Does anyone like these? Regardless, it might be my favorite faction questline in any Bethesda game. The great settings for the quests, the set piece of the attack on New Atlantis, and the pretty well written story are all wonderful. Plus the interesting twist that the villain was actually doing bad stuff in order to help us and our allies was a pretty novel concept. It's let down somewhat by the lackluster AI on the Terramorphs, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I only wish the rest of the game lived up to this standard. Speaking of the rest of the game, we were doing the main quest, weren't we? He says one of his guys in the Sol system found something matching the description of an artifact. Right. So we go to Mars to look for him. We find out from the bartender he's missing on patrol near Venus, dodged some Varun Zealot ships in a ship stealth tutorial that taught me a skill I would never use again, to get close to a UC tracking satellite that points us to an abandoned shipyard in orbit around the moon. At the shipyard, there's a battle going on between Spacers, the game's generic bandit enemies, and Ecliptic, the game's generic mercenary enemies. The guy has left though, and we follow him to Neptune where Ecliptic has hijacked his ship.
Always wanted one of those.
So we hijack it back,
It will be mine.
and he's so grateful, he just hands the artifact over. We take it to the lodge and it starts floating around with the others. This is what most of the main quest is, just looking for artifacts. Next we get 3 missions to choose between. We can go looking for Barrett, who's been out of touch since we left him at the mine. We can check in with Constellation's scanning station to see if it's seen anything interesting, or we can follow a lead on an artifact in Freestar space. You can do these in any order, but let's start with the Freestar one. We meet Constellation's Freestar member and second story follower, Sam Coe, who has a lead on an artifact in the wilderness on the Freestar capital planet, Aquila. Compared to New Atlantis, Aquila City looks like an absolute backwater. It tries to go for a sort of cowboy frontier vibe, but large parts of it don't even have paved streets, and the parts that do are mostly paved in worn cobblestone. The city is also very stratified, with the poor living in the lower levels and the rich living at the top of the city. Insert Cloud District joke here. When we land there, Sam explains he's a descendant of Solomon Coe, the man that started the colony on Aquila and founded the Freestar Collective. There's a family legend that when he was initially scanning the planet, he found a weird reading that matches the artifacts. Now that it's the capital of an interstellar nation, there's too much interference to find the anomaly on a scanner. Instead, we have to find the original maps Solomon made, which are stored in the Aquila Bank. Unfortunately, there's a hostage situation at the bank following a bank robbery gone wrong, which we need to resolve in order to get the maps. But luckily, Marshal Blake, the guy in charge of the security force outside of the bank, is readily willing to put us, some guy, in charge of solving the hostage crisis. The easiest way to do that is by persuading them to surrender to the authorities, so I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about persuasion. Some conversations have options marked persuasion where you can, well, persuade someone to do something. This involves a metagame where you can pick an argument from a list of options that vary in strength to fill up borrowed pips. At first I thought this looked good. You would pick options based on the personality of the person you're talking to, and try to pick up hints from what they're saying to determine which arguments will work and which ones won't. I realized this was wrong when I failed the speech check, reloaded to try again, and noticed arguments that worked the first time didn't work the second time. The way the system actually works is based entirely on the colors next to the responses. White options always work, green are likely to work, yellow less likely, and red unlikely. The actual text on the argument you're choosing doesn't affect the likelihood of success, it only affects the line you get as a response to it. You can increase the chances of your arguments landing by putting more points in the speech perk or using consumables, but you can still fail even with all that, or succeed without any of it, because ultimately this is just a more complicated version of the luck-based speech checks from Fallout 3 and 4. Having arguments land also fills the auto-persuade meter. When it's full, you can deploy your ultimate argument to overwhelm your opponent with facts and logic for a guaranteed success. This works on every speech check, including the final boss. Meaning if you just bank this, you can have a guaranteed speech success for the final conflict of the game without investing any points in the speech skill. Not that you need the auto-persuade meter to succeed every time. You can just make a save before any persuasion check and reload until you get lucky. However we solve the hostage situation, the Marshal's impressed and offers to recruit us into the Freestar Rangers, so let's go do that before continuing with the main quest. Sam briefly described them when talking about Aquila.
As far as the collective is concerned, they're judge, jury, and executioner.
So basically they're a mix of an Old West sheriff and Judge Dredd. The Marshal tells us to meet a Ranger Wilcox in the Ranger HQ, The Rock, which also doubles as a bar. Yeah, real professional having your elite law enforcement agency working out of a bar. Wilcox gives us a brief description of the Rangers. The members of the Freestar Collective each have their own security forces, but only the Rangers have authority across all Freestar space. They're a small organization of less than a dozen, which seems like too few to have an effect on basically anything, but whatever. Before she lets us join, we have to prove we have what it takes by doing a Radiant quest. Have you ever been in the middle of playing a fully scripted, handcrafted questline and thought to yourself, man, I wish there was a procedurally generated piece of filler content here? Me neither. Regardless, we accept a Radiant quest, and after ending the notorious criminal outlaw gang leader's reign of terror, we're made a ranger deputy and given our first assignment. We're going to help Wilcox protect a farmer being threatened by some goons. This is also when we're introduced to the conversation options we get for much of this questline. In a lot of conversations, we get two options, where one is a normal, sane reply, and in the other, you're Vlad the goddamn Impaler.
We'll hunt those men down like the vermin they are.
The responses these get are a bit disappointing.
Then I know where you can start. They heading into those canyons back behind the house.
Most of the time people don't acknowledge the fact that we're talking like a bloodthirsty barbarian, and when they do, they just brush it off like it's no big deal. We talk to the farmer, who directs us to the goons and says they were wearing Freestar military uniforms from the Colony War. After tracking them down, we confront their leader. He talks about how his people were forgotten and betrayed before a fight starts, and we have to kill them all. Funnily enough, enemies will sometimes go down and be incapacitated when low on health, and this happened to the leader for me. So I thought it was scripted and we were meant to arrest and interrogate him, but after killing all his men, the quest didn't progress, and the objective was just kill the ruffians. So I had to execute this defenseless guy in cold blood to proceed the quest. Maybe my Vlad the Impaler characterization is actually canon. Anyway, he has a slate on him saying the ship they used was stolen from the Hope Tech factory and that they had inside help for the theft. The Marshal wants us to investigate the theft, so we head to the Hope Tech factory in the colony of Hopetown. He also figures out who the thugs were. They were from a Freestar military outfit called the 1st Cavalry, elite mech pilots that lost most of their number during the Battle of Nira, the place we found Kaiser in the Vanguard questline. The Marshal used to be one of them, but they were disbanded after the war because their leader, Major Hull, refused to stop fighting when a ceasefire came down, after which he and his remaining officers were thrown in jail. We arrive at Hopetown, and after helping the ranger stationed there clear out some outlaws, she introduces us to the president of Hope Tech, Ron Hope. Most people who talk about him can't give him enough praise, saying he's a great job creator and that this place would be a backwater if it wasn't for him. He's also on the Council of Governors, the leaders of the Freestar Collective, so we're told not to antagonize him. Now, having a corporate executive on the council leading your nation might seem a little strange, and that's because it is. More on that later. For now, we'll hear what Mr. Hope has to say.
I'm sure I don't have to tell you what an outrage it is to have a ship stolen right out of the factory. Justice must be done, and the sooner the better.
Ah, Wes Johnson. Glad you could join us. He admits that a ship was stolen, and that he covered it up to maintain his company's image. But he says that he trusts all his employees and refuses to believe any of them would help steal from the company. When we're done talking, his secretary comes in and says the stolen ship was seen landing on Neon, a city on another Freestar planet. So, that's our next destination. We talk to Price, the ranger stationed on Neon, and it's kind of a shithole. It's clearly inspired by a lot of cyberpunk tropes, but it doesn't do much to set itself apart from other cyberpunk worlds. It kind of feels like an in-universe cyberpunk-inspired theme park. The Rangers' authority isn't respected much, and the local security is less a corrupt police force and more the administrator Benjamin Bayou's private army that doesn't even pretend to work for any kind of public good. The economy consists almost entirely of drug trafficking, since the only drug in known space, Aurora, is produced here, extracted from an alien fish called the chasm bass. Apparently, meth, cocaine, and weed are lost archaeotech in this vision of the future. It's also the seat of a lot of major corporations, but it isn't really clear why. The rest of the Freestar Collective also seems pretty libertarian and business-friendly, so it's not really clear what makes Neon special. Neon's administrator, Benjamin Bayou, is also on the Council of Governors, so that makes 2 corporate executives on it so far. Seems like another great system of government. Our investigation leads us to the ship thief who we interrogate. She tells us she was hired by an officer of the 1st called Maya Cruz, who disappeared before the theft because she needed surgery for a medical emergency. And that she got paid by a guy called Marco who only contacted her using encrypted slates, the paper of the future. She gives us one of the slates, which we hand over to the Ranger's resident nerd, who says he can crack it, but that it'll go faster if he has more of them. So, we check out both of our leads. Maya Cruz had to get treated for some medical problem, and the Marshal suggests we check out the clinic, a top-of-the-line medical space station that guarantees patient confidentiality. After some investigating at the clinic, we find out that she's escaped, but left behind a slate from the 1st's commander, Major Hull, who warns her the Rangers are onto her and tells her to hide in an asteroid mine. Probably would have been a good idea not to leave this here for us to find, but what do I know? Also, wasn't 1st Cavalry a division? Why were they being commanded by a major? Wouldn't some type of general be more appropriate and impressive sounding? We fight our way through about 1 million robots, turrets, and aliens on the asteroid, which is an okay level visually, with the often reused mine interior filled with faintly glowing blue crystals, and defeat Maya Cruz. She, like the leader from before, gets knocked to the ground, but unlike him, she can be interrogated afterwards. She says the first are going after farmers because they were hired to do so, they're just mercenaries. Though she also says getting revenge against the Freestar Collective for locking them in jail was a nice bonus. That's all she's willing to say though. She's a few weeks from dying of her mystery condition and gives us the options to execute her on the spot or let her die of natural causes. Arresting her and bringing her in for more interrogation is for some reason not an option. Either way, we get an encrypted slate from her and deliver it to the nerd who tells us to keep him coming. We next head to the shady bar Red Mile to look for Marco, who's a smuggler funding the first. Another ranger is already there to investigate smugglers and has set up a meeting with a smuggler rival of his. They tell us the owner of Red Mile can set up a meeting with Marco, but will want us to compete in a local blood sport, a gauntlet where someone runs through an alien-infested valley before setting up a meeting. So we compete, win, and meet Marco on his luxury liner of a ship, another pretty good level. The sheer level of opulence on display here really sets it apart from the standard Starfield fare. He also has an encrypted slate, but he's willing to negotiate. He'll give it to us in exchange for the Rangers, leaving him and his smuggling operation alone. He actually makes some good points about how the Council of Governors is thoroughly corrupt, and we can't really refute him because it's 100% correct. We can also just kill him, in which case we have to shoot our way through his surprisingly large force of guards.
We hunted them down and they died like dogs.
While the writing here hasn't been up to par with the Vanguard questline, I have to say fighting human enemies is a lot more fun than fighting the Terrormorphs. And shooting our way through this decadent luxury ship makes for a fun shooting gallery. We return to the nerd with his last slate, and while he's working on those, we meet with Wilcox and the Marshal. They tell us the first has attacked more farmers and even killed some of them.
I'll kill every last one of the first.
The nerd then barges in saying he's cracked the encryption and found out the first headquarters is in a place called the Factory.
The Factory? That was our nickname for the main facility where the mechs were manufactured.
Great nickname for a factory. They tell us to go there and check it out. Alone. A deputy. I guess all the actual rangers are too busy drinking at the official ranger bar to help. As soon as we arrive in orbit, we're assaulted by waves of ships, including a Zumwalt? Man, I know those ships are modern, but this is something else. After we take those out, we land on the surface and attack the mech factory, also known as the Factory. And this has the potential of being a really cool level. A rogue military outfit famous for their skill at mech warfare, occupying an abandoned mech factory, who were jailed for going against the armistice that outlawed mechs. I wanted to see some damn mechs, at least once so we could have a cool boss fight, but no, there are no active mechs. It's still a pretty good looking level with these large underground rooms filled with massive machinery and the rusting remains of half-finished mechs. And the sheer number of human enemies present makes for another good shooting gallery. But I am disappointed that they set up a boss fight so perfectly and then just didn't deliver. And don't tell me they couldn't model and animate a new enemy type just for this one encounter, when so many planets that aren't used for any questline have several types of unique animals that seemingly exist solely to waste your time with scanning. We fight our way through the first and finish what was started on Nira, seemingly wiping them out. Major Holt talks at us, explaining his actions throughout, but we have no choice to answer or seek an ending that doesn't involve his entire unit being exterminated.
If the first is there, I'll make sure none of them survive.
That's not even a joke anymore, it's just the most honest option. Now, as I said, he monologues at us as we go through the factory, but the stuff he says feels like it's written for a different story.
So when I tell you that you're being manipulated, you know I'm telling the truth. You think the Council of Governors really cares about anything but themselves? They're greedy and corrupt.
I mean, he's not entirely wrong, they are corrupt, but they're genuinely not manipulating us to fight him. We're here because he's killing farmers, and that's not a lie. He is killing farmers.
Minutes away, minutes from winning the battle and the war, when the ceasefire order came down.
Didn't anyone tell him the Freestar Collective won the colony war? Because he's talking like the Germans after World War I, who were convinced they could have won but were betrayed. It would have been a little weird if the Germans still believed that myth if they had won. After we
kill every last one of the first,
we can finally have a conversation with Hull, and it's more of him complaining their leaders lost them a war they won, until he finally reveals who hired him. It was Ron Hope. Yep, The guy who endlessly railed against us for doing the bidding of the corrupt Council of Governors was working for one of the members of that council. To be fair, he kept evidence against Ron Hope and planned to use it to expose his crimes. He gives it to us and tells us to use the evidence to bring down Ron Hope, eliminating the corruption in the Freestar Collective so he can be strong for the next war, which he sees as inevitable. I guess he thinks Ron Hope is the driving force behind all that's wrong with the Freestar Collective. Then he attacks us and we can't arrest him, so he has to die. That's probably fine, it's not like a witness would be useful in the high-profile trial against one of the most powerful people in the nation. No way, it's better to just kill him. Evidence in hand and a mystery solved, we return to the Marshal, and together with the other Rangers no wait, that's not what we do. Our only option at this point is to head straight to Hope Town without telling anyone else what we've learned. Alone. A deputy. We can't even ask the ranger who's stationed in Hope Town, whose office we literally walk right past on the way there, to come with us. When we stupidly confront Hope on our own, he admits everything and explains the scheme after we show him the evidence. His shipbuilding business was starting to lose profits, so he diversified into fertilizers to stay afloat. The fertilizers killed all the crops planted in them, but made the soil rich in minerals. He saw an opportunity to sell the fertilizers to farmers, which would turn the land barren, but fill it with valuable minerals that he could then buy up and extract for pennies on the dollar. He hired Hull to buy the land, claiming he never told him to use force, but that seems hard to believe. You don't hire elite mercenaries for a land purchase unless you're ready to use force. He offers to stop the scheme, return all the farmland, set up a fund for all the people that died, and even offers us a bribe to stay quiet. If we accept, we give him the evidence, and that's that. If we don't accept, he pulls a gun and tries to kill us, together with the secretary and like 2 of the small cop guards. Pretty confident, seeing as how we just single-handedly wiped out the entire force of mercenaries he hired, but I guess he thinks he can take us. This seems a little excessive, given that we don't know if the Freestar Collective even has any independent courts that can prosecute him. The Rangers work for the Council, so what can they do? Arrest their boss? There's no indication that anyone in the Freestar government has the authority to put him on trial. The only possible people who would have the power to bring him down would be the other governors, and why would they care he's killing some random farmers? They would have more of an incentive to ensure he doesn't suffer any consequences to avoid setting a precedent that could be used against them. It's a good thing he tries to kill us so we can take him out in self-defense, otherwise he probably would have gotten away with it. Hell, in another questline, his fellow governor, Benjamin Bayou, admits he regularly has people murdered and he never faces any justice for that. Hull was wrong. Ron Hope wasn't the cause of the corruption in the Freestar Collective. Whole thing is rotten to the core. We report back to the Marshal, who is hanging out at the bar. We tell him about how we massacred the first, and either tell him the truth about Hope, or lie and say we got nothing from Hull. If we tell the truth, the Marshal's shocked, but Wilcox isn't even surprised, though she naively says,
"Have a little faith, Daniel. We're not the United Colonies. One bad apple won't spoil the whole damn barrel."
If we lie, the Marshal's disappointed, accurately pointing out that the first weren't acting on their own and that the real mastermind is still on the loose. They then say our evaluation is finally finished. We're made a full-fledged ranger and given a unique spacesuit and a special ship. The ship is pretty nice. It even has a brake we can't use since this game has no mechanic for taking prisoners. What a fitting reward for a questline where we play a law enforcer that never even has the option of arresting someone. And that's the end of the Ranger questline. It has some problems, to put it mildly. I think it's meant to be a story where we gradually discover that the people we're working for are corrupt and we have to turn against our leaders to cleanse the rot at the heart of the collective. But not only does it not acknowledge that Ron Hope isn't the only bad actor on the Council of Governors, he's not even the worst one, but it also tries to paint him in a positive light. Even after the conspiracy has been revealed, people keep talking about how he's such a great job creator and that he always treated his employees well.
Everything he did was to keep his people employed, to keep Hope Tech standing in a backstabbing world of megacorp politics.
The option to take the bribe isn't even painted as a purely greedy and selfish move. If we talk to Sam about it afterwards, we can say we took the bribe to ensure all the workers in Hope Town won't lose their jobs, and he buys it. I wouldn't have minded an option to join the First, or at least side with them in their struggle against the Freestar government. I don't know how that would be implemented. Replacing the council with a military junta might be too much work, but the way it is now, every ending has the player becoming a lackey for the Council of Governors. Not to mention some of the bad writing on display, like how we can't arrest and interrogate anyone, how none of the other Rangers come with us to the factory, or how we have to confront Ron Hope immediately without telling anyone first. I will say that the factory was one of the most fun levels in the game, mainly just due to the sheer number of enemies present. Though I'm still disappointed we never got that boss fight against the Metal Gear. Also, for a setting that looks very hopeful and optimistic on the surface level, all 3 of the main factions kinda suck. One is a snake-worshipping theocracy, one is a corrupt oligarchy where 3 of the 5 members on their leading council are corporate executives, and at least 2 admit to having had people murdered. I want to confirm this after finishing the script because I couldn't remember who the 3rd executive on the council was. According to StarfieldWiki.net, Walter from Constellation is on the Freestar Council of Governors, but the fandom wiki doesn't list him as a member. Neither wiki lists a reference for their claim, and while I can't remember the game ever saying he was on the council, I also can't remember all the members being listed anywhere. I'll put Walter being on the council down as a maybe. And the last faction is a Starship Troopers-esque military republic, though the more I think about it, the more that feels like an oversight. Like, maybe citizenship for natives would be handled like a normal country, but military service would be a way for foreigners to become citizens. But the game does explicitly say that isn't the case.
No one is born a United Colony citizen. Only through service to the UC can one hope to earn one's citizenship.
Anyway, back to the main plot. With the bank robbers taken care of, we can go look for the maps in the vault, but find a note instead. Sam's dad, Jacob, has taken the maps, so we go talk to him. Their relationship is strained. Jacob thinks Sam, being an explorer, isn't living up to their family legacy as descendants of Solomon Coe, the legendary explorer. You can persuade him to hand the maps over, or just steal them. The maps indicate the artifact is in a cave used as a base by some outlaws, and in a shocking display of seamlessness, we can leap over the wall and run straight there without going through a loading screen. It's nice to see Bethesda rediscover the Open Cities STC after it was lost in the dark age of technology that came after Morrowind, but here it feels a little strange. While it's true that you can just walk right out of most cities into the open world outside, this isn't the case for underground cities like Sidonia and New Homestead. And most cities have parts of them that are only accessible by going through a loading screen like the Well in New Atlantis or the Neon Core. And confusingly, some stores are part of the exterior and can be entered seamlessly without a loading screen, but others are interior cells and you need to go through a loading screen to enter them. Why isn't this general store seamless when this other one is? Why can I seamlessly go into this fast food restaurant but not this gun store? The gun store is a single room with one person inside, surely that won't overload the memory of modern consoles. For Starfield, I would rather they made stores and other buildings in the city seamless rather than the areas outside the cities, because you don't really have to go to the areas outside the cities much. There are a few quests to do so here and there. Ironically, most of those quests that I could remember are on Mars, which you'll recall is not seamless. I don't want to give the wrong impression here though. All the complaints about excessive loading screens are completely true. Take turning in this quest on the Key, the hub for the Crimson Fleet faction. You fast travel there, which has a loading screen, and appear in space near the Key. You then dock to it, which has an unskippable cutscene, then board, which has a loading screen, then move from the docking area to the main area, which is a separate cell, meaning a loading screen. Then you enter the bar, which is also a separate cell, meaning another loading screen. Then after a quick chat, it's back to the main area, and another loading screen. Where you take an elevator to the upper level, which means, you guessed it, another loading screen. The upper level's even in the same cell, you can fly there with your jetpack without a loading screen. Why is there a loading screen for the elevator? You get the point. There are a lot of loading screens in this game, and that's not even mentioning all the unskippable little cutscenes that, as we saw when docking in the example, didn't even hide the loading screen. We reach the cave, fight our way through the outlaws, grab the artifact, and leave. The outlaw leader confronts us on the way out, and we can actually convince her to just let us go after killing dozens of her guys on the way in. And if you help her fight off an animal attack, she even gives you a gun as a reward. After putting the artifact with the others, we can either go look for Barrett or go to another Constellation member, Vladimir, who's on the Constellation space station called the Eye, scanning for artifacts. We meet with Vladimir first, who speaks with a strange slang that he says comes from his past as a pirate of the Crimson Fleet. But in another questline, we can actually join the Crimson Fleet, and no one else there talks like that. Anyway, he's picked up some readings on his scans that he thinks are artifacts, and has sent another Constellation member, and our third potential story follower, Andreja, to check them out, but hasn't heard from her in a while, so we head out to investigate. We find an artifact in a near-empty cave, and as we look for the next one in a mine, we find Andreja gunning down some Vruan zealots. She later explains that when the rest of House Vruan went into isolation, the zealots remained and now just attack everyone. She joins us as we head deeper into the mine to find the artifact. Now, since we found her gunning down some zealots at the entrance, you might expect the mine to be guarded by more of them, right? Well, it's not, it's actually full of spacers. According to the wiki, both planets are randomized, so if you've done this quest and had it go down differently, that's why. That's also why the mine was full of spacers for me. It's a random mine, and spacers love hanging out in random mines, while Vruan zealots do not. Personally, I don't really see the benefit of using randomized planets for this. It probably would have been better to use a hand-picked, purpose-made map, if for no other reason than letting us fight the correct enemy type. We toss the artifacts in the pile and return to Vladimir. He's found an even bigger anomaly matching the artifacts and sends us to investigate. After we land, we don't actually get a quest marker for once and have to look for the anomaly based on interference on our scanner. Or at least we do on this planet since it's so foggy. With most other temples, you can just fly up in the air and see them from where you landed. After following the interference, we find a large black structure jutting out from the ground and make our way inside. The interior has black walls with particles of light floating around like stars in space, and at the center of the room is a large spinning gyroscope-looking thing. We float up into the air as gravity stops applying to us, and while it's not immediately apparent what to do, we eventually realize that flying into these small clouds of the glowing particles speeds up the rotation of the gyroscope, causing Andreja to comically get launched at a wall when she flies into it. After a while of this, the rings of the gyroscope line up. We fly into it and are imbued with the power to create an anti-gravity field. We can later find more of these temples and gain more powers from them, like disarming enemies or entering max pain mode. The one I used the most was Personal Atmosphere, which refills your stamina and lets you sprint without consuming stamina, even when over-encumbered. Why did I use this one the most? Because this game will have you running like your Fadippides, running from one quest NPC to the next, running to sell stuff at the store, or worst of them all, running around procedurally generated planets trying to find that last road you need to press E at to complete a scan. This game really needs a vehicle, maybe an ATV or a hoverbike, or a speedier jetpack, because as it stands right now, the best way of getting around is using the Personal Atmosphere power and sprinting everywhere. Correction. After writing this, I've learned that there is a speedier setting for the jetpack. You normally activate the jetpack by pressing the jump key twice. If that's the default keybind on spacebar, that will preserve your current forward speed and just propel you upward. But if you bind jump to a different key, that will launch you up at a forward angle instead. This makes movement faster, especially on low gravity worlds, but it feels more like a bug than a feature, and it's still not as fast as I'd like. The powers work a bit like the shots from Skyrim, except here it's never really explained why flying into the ring at the temple gives us these abilities. We find out that the same people that made the artifacts are behind the temples, but it's never really explained why they want people to get these powers. And even after the story's done, we're never given a clear answer, which is strange because these powers will turn out to be the cause of most conflicts in the main story. We go back to Constellation and show them our new power. They're impressed and theorize there's a temple for every artifact. You can talk to Vladimir for directions to more temples in one of the more boring and monotonous power acquisition methods I've seen in a game. You talk to Vladimir, get a quest marker to a temple, get the new power in the exact same way we did at the first temple, return to Vladimir, and repeat. I genuinely never even did it this way once though. Sometimes when you enter a new system, you'll just get a quest to check out a temple, and that's the only way I ever got new powers. The proper way is just too boring. This did mean that I never unlocked the full list of powers though. With those two quests taken care of, we return to the mine from the intro to look for Barrett. Our old boss is there alone to meet us. After we left, the pirates returned. They killed many of the miners and kidnapped Barrett, along with our friendly coworker from the intro. We used the mine's computer to pick up a distress call from Barrett, which leads us to the pirate ship crashed on a lifeless world, with only our coworker remaining. He tells us he and Barrett tried to escape, but that Barrett accidentally crashed the ship instead. They were free until another pirate ship showed up, took Barrett away, and left our coworker for dead. He's picked up another transmission from Barrett, telling us where he went, so we set off. Don't worry though, we can recruit our old buddy and take him with us so we don't just leave him for dead here. We can recruit our old boss too, and they have good skills for running outposts, so let's go over outposts. But because that system is so intertwined with crafting and planetary exploration, we'll cover those here too. We can start with exploration since it's the most important. When you enter orbit around a planet or moon, you can scan it to see what raw materials are present and points of interest where you can land for some dull radiant quests or a combat encounter against some generic enemies in a location that can be interesting the first time you do it. This oil platform looking thing that's been overrun by a swarm of aliens is a good example. But they get old quick when you realize these are copy-pasted in multiple locations. And I don't just mean it's a prefab structure with the same layout as another location. I mean they're completely identical, right down to the placement of environmental storytelling corpses. Exploring the areas outside these points of interest isn't any better. The only thing to really do out there is surveying the planet, which involves getting your scanner out and pressing E at resources, animals, and plants. Not all the plants though. These trees aren't worth scanning. Now these trees, they're a different story altogether. No survey of this world is complete without cataloging every atom of this bad boy. Scanning plants isn't too bad since they don't move and don't fight back, but scanning animals can be annoying with the default scanning range. You can extend this by building an outpost building or investing skill points in the relevant perk. Or you can employ a more aggressive form of scanning. Killing an animal scans it, so if you want to scan that herd of peaceful alien grazers off in the distance, you can do it from afar by just gunning them down. If it was good enough for Teddy Roosevelt, it's good enough for me. Lastly, you need to find some landmarks, which, like the points of interest, can be interesting the first time, but lose their luster somewhat when you discover the same sentient microbial colony for the 5th time. I found this whole process extremely tedious, and on top of that, it's almost completely pointless. There's no codex with lore for the animals and plants that you can read after finishing the survey. Other than some Radiant quests from Constellation that pay a pittance, the only reason to finish a survey is that fully surveying a planet increases the production of outposts there. At least that's what the pop-up says, but some of the tips in the game I know are false. Like this one that says the payload skill makes guards less likely to discover contraband when all it does is increase your ship's cargo capacity. Deception is the perk that reduces the chance of contraband being discovered, not payloads. So mechanically exploring planets is not the best, but what about visually? Well, I'm a bit biased in the game's favor here because I'm just a sucker for all things space. Tell me an images of something in space and it immediately looks cooler to me. That being said, there's something about these vast auto-generated landscapes that just hasn't hit the spot for me. I can't point to any massive flaws in the visuals that would cause this. Maybe it's the lack of anything meaningful to do in these landscapes, or the tedium of the activities there are to do there that soured me on them. Maybe it's a case of less is more, and they should have put more effort into handcrafting a few higher quality areas as opposed to procedurally generating an infinite number of kinda just okay areas. There are some handcrafted outdoor areas used in a couple of quests, and you can absolutely tell when a human designed the level. Whatever procedural generation they're using just can't compare with an actual designer. One area where it isn't so bad is on lifeless moons, where the simple topography and randomly placed rocks are a bit less noticeable. There's a certain tranquility to be found on an empty, lifeless chunk of rock floating around in space that can't be replicated anywhere on Earth. Especially when the planet the moon orbits is clearly visible in the clear, airless sky. So it's a shame these levels are often kinda ruined by having abandoned bases absolutely everywhere. They also missed a chance to have some really interesting visuals by not leaning into the wonders of space more. There aren't any exotic star types like pulsars or black holes. No majestic natural wonders like this real exoplanet with a ring system about as wide as the distance from the Earth to the Sun, which would be visible with the naked eye from other planets throughout the system. Not to mention gaps in the rings indicate there may be moons within the ring system. I can imagine those moons would be popular places for outposts. There also aren't any artificial wonders like megastructures, and while that's a valid artistic choice if they don't want those in the story, the lack of any of these stellar landmarks means most places outside of handcrafted quest areas feel really samey. If you've seen One Star System, you've kinda seen them all. To sum up exploration, it's bad. Which is bad for the game because, historically, exploration has been the foundational pillar holding up the otherwise less than stellar game design and writing of Bethesda's games. And here, that pillar is cracked and breaking. This is Starfield's greatest failing. Without good exploration, Starfield would need to be a major improvement in other areas to compensate for its loss. And to me, it simply isn't. Next, let's talk crafting, or maybe I should say modding, since the only things you can craft are drugs, which I always had in such good supply that crafting more felt pointless. Food, which is just drugs but worse, and crafting components, which are really just a means to an end. The real useful stuff comes from weapon and armor modding. These mods do about what you might expect, increasing the offensive stats on guns and the defensive stats on armor. Strangely, you can't mod melee weapons, something you could do in Fallout 4 and 76. But, before you can craft anything, you need to research it by going into a research bench and dumping a bunch of raw materials into it. But, before you can do that, you need to invest skill points in the relevant perk. I get why you would want to put a skill requirement for building advanced weapon mods, but the research is a bit excessive. I'm already spending materials to build the damn thing, why do I also need to spend materials just to unlock it, when I've already spent skill points to unlock it? not to mention the need to grind the challenges to unlock the perks. It's also a massive pain trying to keep track of what materials to be on the lookout for, because Bethesda for some reason decided to take the fully functional material tracking system from Fallout 4 and 76 and make it a lot worse. In those games, when you want to craft an item but are missing a material needed to make it, you can choose to track it, and it'll track the thing you're missing. Makes sense, right? You're missing that material, so you want to be on the lookout for it. In Starfield, if you do the same thing, it will track all the materials needed to craft the thing, even the stuff you already have enough of. In Fallout 4 and 76, you can also manually add or remove components from the list of tracked materials, while in Starfield, you can't. This combined with the shockingly long list of crafting components makes it a big hassle to keep track of what you actually need to buy from stores, since you're probably tracking all sorts of crap you already have plenty of on top of the stuff you actually need. And while on the topic of stores, they're the best source of crafting materials, and likely the only one you'll ever need unless you want to get into Outpost building. Their prices are surprisingly cheap, and they keep most stuff you need for weapon and armor mods in stock. But if that's the case, what's the use of Outposts? Good question. Unfortunately, there isn't a good answer. The whole Outpost system simultaneously feels like it's really high effort and extremely half-baked. You can plop down an outpost anywhere you like as long as it's not near a landmark, and the reason to do so is crafting materials. When you scan a planet from orbit, you can see which materials are available in different areas of the planet. And putting more points in the scanning skill lets you see higher level materials in the scan, so you can put down your outpost in the area with all the materials you want. Except, you don't actually need that perk. Crafting materials are sorted into families, and all the minerals present on the planet from that family can be found in the same area as the rest of them. So if you want to set up an outpost to mine some dysprosium, you can just find a planet with dysprosium on it, land in an area with lead, and because lead and dysprosium are in the same family, there should be dysprosium in the area. While we have this on screen, let's just take in the absolute number of crafting materials in this game. And this isn't even all of them. There are also manufactured materials and organic materials, bringing the total number of crafting components to a staggering 107. To put that into perspective, Satisfactory, a game entirely about similar resource extraction and refining, has 96 crafting components. Meanwhile, Fallout 4, Bethesda's earlier game with similar weapon modding and outpost building, was able to make do with just 31, which kinda makes Starfield's numbers seem a bit excessive. So now you've landed in the right area, but you can't just set up an outpost anywhere you like. You need to put it near deposits of the resources you want. These can be found using the regular scanner, but it has a pretty short range, so a better way is to start placing an outpost, which lets you see what resources are in range of that potential outpost. You then run around aimlessly as you swing the outpost back and forth like a radar dish, looking for the specific material you need. And if that's a rare material, this can take a while. You also have limited outpost slots, so you typically want to make the best of your outpost by putting them in spots where all the materials from a whole resource family can be mined, which means more running around waving an outpost around like a radar dish until finally you find that perfect spot and put down the outpost. I'll once again bring up Satisfactory, where you can ping for material deposits of your choosing after manually digging up some of the same material. I think most people would agree that's a better system than this. This lets you build extractors on the resource deposits, some power generators, along with some storage containers. Link them all up with the pretty clunky cargo linking system, and you've got yourself an outpost. But wait, there's more. You can only mine inorganic materials out of deposits, but there are also organic materials. To produce those, you need to find a planet with plant or animal life and fully scan those plants and animals until you find the one that produces the resource you want and allows outpost production. And unlike the stuff you dig out of the ground, there is no way to know what organic materials you can find on any given planet without fully scanning all of its plant and animal life. Once you find a life form that both produces the thing you want and lets you produce it at an outpost, you can invest a point in the botany or zoology perk, depending on if it's a plant or an animal, and build a greenhouse or barn, which will then start producing material once it's connected to water, and if it's a barn, food in the form of fiber or nutrient. Then build some fabricators to start turning those raw materials into manufactured resources. Except most of these require materials that can't all be found in the same place, which is where cargo links enter the picture. These big landing platforms can be used to transport materials from one outpost to the other. Each link only goes between 2 outposts, and you can only build 3 of these in any given outpost unless you invest in a perk to increase that number. However, as you've probably already figured out, you only really need 2 cargo links in each of your outposts to daisy chain them all together and collect all your materials in the same place. With that taken care of, you can finally start manufacturing stuff. All you have to do is put all your materials in an excessive amount of storage containers. Since you can't filter cargo transfers, the only way not to clog up all your cargo containers with materials you have in excess, preventing stuff you have in short supply from coming in, is to have a lot more storage space than you would need in a better factory game. You then connect your fabricators and cargo containers in a winding spider web of connections in order to manufacture components that then go towards manufacturing other components that eventually, at some point, let you make the highest level, most valuable manufacturing materials in the game. This is your reward, the fruit of hours of your labor, and you might ask, what is it for? Well, it's not nothing, but it's close. As I mentioned when I talked about crafting, the easiest way of getting your hands on materials is to just buy them from the many well-stocked and reasonably priced merchants throughout the game. But even if you can't buy a material you need, you can craft them manually using the industrial workbench as long as you have a few points in the special project skill. The only advantage to building outposts over just buying and crafting materials is that you can automate their manufacture, letting you more easily gather large quantities of materials. But the only thing that really requires large quantities of crafting materials is building outposts, which you've already done to reach this point. Making your outposts more efficient isn't really a good motivation either when you can just sit in a chair and make 24 hours of production go by in seconds. But even if you couldn't do that, the only reward for making your outposts more efficient would be increasing the production of materials whose only purpose is increasing your outpost's production of materials. The only other use of materials at that point would be selling them for money, which you absolutely can do, but you know what else is a good method of money making? Just playing the game normally and picking up all the weapons enemies drop. Their sell price is kinda ridiculous, especially the higher tier advanced versions. And if you're worried about being over-encumbered, don't be. You can still sprint when over-encumbered. It'll quickly drain your O2 meter and fill your CO2 meter, which will damage your health when full, but what it won't do is kill you. You can be moving at a dead run while carrying a literal metric ton of crap on you, and as long as nothing hits you, the only penalty is an annoying red filter and audio effect. And even those can be avoided by using the personal atmosphere power, which keeps your stamina maxed out, no matter what. The only thing limiting your money making at that point is how much money the vendors have on them, which is also a problem if you're selling stuff from your outposts, and it's easy to refill by just sitting in a chair for a few days. Oh, and you can assign followers to a prefab building with a single disk in it, consigning your former colleagues to a life alone in an empty room on a barren, lifeless rock so they can moderately boost the production of materials you don't even need. It's obvious that a lot of effort went into the trinity of crafting, exploring, and especially outposts given the excessive complexity of automating material production, which is the only practical purpose of outposts, and kinda the only purpose of planet exploration outside of fighting enemies in copy-pasted points of interest. But at the same time, these systems suffer from a lack of purpose. Once you realize the rewards don't even come close to justifying the level of effort required to attain them, I can't imagine most people kept doing it. And I haven't even mentioned how many skill points you have to invest to max out your outposts, or how finding planets with unique crafting materials without looking them up online is basically impossible. In short, the outpost system is bad for the many reasons I just described. The crafting system would be fine, except they broke the working material tracking they had in their earlier games, and exploration is bad since all it is pointlessly scanning stuff and clearing out the same copy-pasted pirate bases over and over again. I wouldn't mind if they just cut landing outside of points of interest, removed the scanning in the outposts, and instead spent that development time making more dungeons to ensure you never get repeats. Alright, now that we have that overly long tangent out of the way, let's go back to the story. Barrett's captured by the Crimson Fleet, and we're gonna save him. But it turns out the pirate that captured him is actually a cool guy, and is willing to let him go peacefully, even if we kill this guys outside. However, we free him, we return him to the lodge, and he becomes our fourth and final story follower. Now it's Walter, Constellation's billionaire sponsor, that has the lead on buying a stolen artifact in the city of Neon. It's a pretty unremarkable mission whose only standout sections are this one, where Walter's wife guides us through a hostile office like Morpheus in that one scene in The Matrix, and the confrontation with the artifact's original owner, who's voiced by Darren DePaul, basically doing his Reinhardt voice.
Where else can you match wits for the highest stakes but here?
It's strangely easy to avoid a confrontation with him. There isn't even a speech check, he just wants us to decide what to do with the thief we bought the artifact from. It isn't even a test or anything, he's okay with just letting the guy go. A classic Bethesda moral choice where the options are to be normal or randomly kill someone for no reason. While we're here, we can also talk about the faction based in Neon, Ryujin. They're a mega corporation, and we join them in the most realistic way of joining any faction, by sending in an application and going there for an interview, where we find out we only got the interview because the application software was bugged and approved everyone. The person that was supposed to conduct the interviews isn't even there, and their stand-in, Imogen, can't be asked with more interviews, so she just hires us on the spot, no matter how poorly the interview goes. We're given the exciting task of fetching coffee from Space Starbucks for a board meeting, but the guy we were hired to replace confronts us at the coffee shop. He got fired and he doesn't even know why. He pulls a gun and we can either talk him down or kill him. However we dealt with the situation, Imogen is impressed and promotes us to junior operative. The role involves us ensuring the company's continued success by cloak and dagger means, setting this up as the talking and sneaking faction as opposed to how the others worked. After the coffee delivery, we got our first real assignment: sneak into the office of a rival corporation and upload some malware to their computers. We skillfully infiltrate the office by walking through the front door like we own the place, sit down at a cubicle, upload the malware, and leave without incident. The second mission is more of the same exciting infiltration action that's borderline impossible to fail, even with no points in the stealth skill. The third mission is also very simple, if a bit amusing. We need to convince a security chief to hand over our access card. There are a few different ways of getting it, but I like persuasion the most. We, a complete stranger, just rock up to her and ask her for her keycard. She obviously refuses, and the persuasion option basically just boils down to, "Aw, come on, dude!" This works. Next up is an actual real mission, and not just a glorified Radiant quest with some voice acting attached to it. Which is what those other ones were, by the way. We have to make sure a deal one of our rivals is currently negotiating at a local nightclub fails. We do this by stealing and replacing our rival's PowerPoint presentation with a sabotaged version, and convincing the executives they're negotiating with not to go through with the deal. Or we can just kill everyone involved. Our bosses will be pissed, but they won't fire us.
We have a decent backlog of assignments, so you'll have plenty of chances to get back into good graces.
Either way, the deal is stopped, and we get another pair of glorified Radiant quests where we sneak into a competitor to plant a sabotage device and steal a schematic. I especially like the part where people question if we're supposed to be here, but don't make any effort to stop us or anything like that. Phew, game got dangerously close to having actual gameplay in the quests there. We're rewarded with another real quest after that, given by Imogen's superior, Ularu. She tasks us with getting some information from an informant working for our rival, Infinity Ltd. He tells us Affinity is working on something called Project Dominion, which we'll later learn is an experimental brain chip stolen from Ryujin that gives its user the power of mind control. We download more information from the local Infinity representative's computer and deliver it to Laru, who figures out that the design was stolen from Ryujin, meaning Amogus. We inform Asako, the CEO, who tasks us with finding out who the traitor is. We're sent to Dalton, the chief of security, who wants us to investigate Ularu by sneaking into the office while it's closed for maintenance and downloading information from her computer. Sneaking into the Ryujin office is a pretty neat stealth section, where we have to navigate through the same offices we've passed through a bunch of times at this point. I didn't use stealth much outside of the Ryujin infiltration missions, so I don't have too much to say about it. It does seem a bit overly reliant on crawling through these extremely roomy vents. Seriously, the vents are even this big on space stations, where space should be at a premium. If we decide to cut a bloody swath through our coworkers instead of sneaking, Dalton will scold us when we turn the quest in, but they'll still keep giving us jobs. I feel like shooting up the office when explicitly told not to should be a fireable offense, but maybe that's wrong. However we get it, Dalton analyzes the evidence and concludes our manager Imogen is the traitor. We go to bring her in for questioning, and after some running around and talking, we find her hiding in a syndicate hideout. This is when we get the first big decision for the questline. If we talk to her, she claims she's innocent and that Ularu set her up. She provides a slate of evidence, or if we randomly decide to kill her, we have to loot it off her corpse. We have a few options on how to handle the situation, but from what I can tell, there are only 3 outcomes in the end. We can confront Ularu and kill her, or we can hand the evidence over to Dalton, who will verify to make sure it's legit. The third outcome is if we confront her with the evidence, but side with her to depose Masako as CEO. Regardless of what we pick, we check back in with Masako, who figures the best way to proceed is to finish our own mind-controlled ship before Infinity can. They had contracted a mining company to dig up some rare minerals needed for the chip, but lost contact with them a while ago. We learned the miners have all been killed on Infinity's orders, follow a lead from there to the clinic, discover that Infinity's been conducting human experiments that killed almost all their subjects, grab the minerals, and deliver them to our head of R&D. After that, we meet Dalton, and he's reviewed the evidence to confirm that Ularu is the mole. He's talked to Masako, and they want to keep this secret until there's more solid proof. Until then, they want us to maintain the illusion Imogen was the mole. They have a plan to get that proof too. If she's still alive, Ularu is making a program we're supposed to use to get evidence of Infinity Ltd's wrongdoings, and they think she's gonna tamper with the evidence to implicate Masako in their conspiracy, letting her take over as CEO. We're to bring the program to Dalton before using it, so he can find proof of the tampering and remove it. Unless we kill Ularu or sided with her, in which case they'll reveal the truth to the board and clear Imogen's name right away, or they think the mole situation has been dealt with and proceed with a plan to infiltrate Infinity, unaware of the plan to frame Masako. The next step is to head down to R&D and get the Jedi Mind Trick module installed. You can't say no to the implant, the only way to refuse is to not finish the questline, which is a bit strange because it's not like you'd have to rewrite anything to account for the player refusing. We get on the operating table in a rare first-person animation and get the chip installed. It's not as impressive as you'd think. It unlocks the manipulation perk, which allows us to briefly mind control an enemy, and unlocks some extra good speech options in the persuasion minigame. Don't get me wrong, these are useful, mainly the speech options, but with how hyped up this was, you'd think it would completely render the persuasion minigame obsolete. And if you think Bethesda would never do something like that, let me remind you of the skeleton key from Oblivion and Skyrim that completely trivializes their lockpicking minigames. And I don't remember a lot of people complaining about that. This is extra weird because at the end of this questline, it does work like that, but we'll put a pin in that for now. After testing the implant, we meet back up with Masako and either Ularu or Dalton depending on our choices. We're given the job of infiltrating Infinity. Once inside, we'll steal their gnomish mind control cap and install a program on the computers belonging to Infinity's CEO and their head of R&D that will download evidence of their attack on the mine and their illegal human experiments, but delete all information regarding the indoctrination implant. We'll turn over our findings to the media. Their broadcast should destroy Infinity's stock price and probably land their CEO in jail. We get the options of sneaking in or entering the building with a false identity. If we have Ularu in the briefing, she gives us intel on how to start a gas leak in the office, evacuating everyone but the guards, making sneaking easier. If we kill Ularu, we can meet Imogen in a cafe outside the Infinity office. She's got the keycard to a disgruntled researcher's locker with his R&D uniform inside, letting us enter the R&D area without arousing suspicion. In the cursed timeline where we kill both of them, we get neither option, and doing the mission without being caught is much more difficult. Both methods of getting in are a nice finale to the questline, with one testing our sneaking abilities and the other our social infiltration abilities. There are several options on how to deal with obstacles and plenty of chances to use our Jedi mind tricks, so overall, I'd say it's pretty good. We turn over the evidence to an investigative reporter at Space CNN and return to Masako as she hears the news broadcast. She's either happy to have taken down a rival or angry that she's been set up. We then get 2 or 3 moral choices. We need to convince the board to buy Infinity, or not, to stop the mind control, or not, and if we set up Masako, whether to replace her with Ularu, or not. Yes, we can go through the effort of framing Masako, only to then change our mind and convince the board to keep her as CEO, and thanks to the implant, we can't fail. Yeah, remember when I said the implant guarantees success only at the end of this questline? Some of the board members can't be made to change their minds with the persuasion minigame, but if you use the manipulation speech option here, they will vote however you want, regardless of what they themselves believe. Not to repeat myself, but this should have been an option for all persuasion challenges after getting the implant. The ending is a board meeting where the board votes on Infinity, the mind control chip, and whether to keep Masako as CEO if she was set up. There's a very satisfying scene where Ularu is dragged out by security if we go down that route. After the meeting, Masako, or Ularu, gives us a thumbs up and promotes us to senior operative. Yeah, we were getting tasked with high-risk missions to infiltrate both our biggest competitor and our own office, as well as having the first and potentially only mind-controlled chip ever entrusted to us as a junior operative. If that's what they make the rookies do, what could our new responsibilities as a senior operative possibly be? Sadly, the answer is Radiant quests, which means I'm done here. I'm not a fan of this questline. There's a lot of bad stuff here, like how the story revolves entirely around petty boardroom politics with only unlikable characters, or how we're made to do boring filler Radiant quests just to progress the storyline, and the implant being inconsistent in the abilities it gives you. That isn't just me being disappointed I can't skip the persuasion minigame either. While that would have been nice, its inconsistency makes it hard to judge how dangerous it is when making the call on whether you want to ban it or not. Does it have the power to permanently change someone's mind on deeply held beliefs? Its interaction with the executives would suggest that, but the rest of the game makes it seem much less powerful than that. And we're told by the head of R&D that the effect is temporary, so who knows? Another strange thing is that the executives are excited about the chip because they think it'll sell well. It seems really unambitious if you invent a device that gives the user mind control powers, and the best thing you can think of doing with it is selling it to the general public. It also seems really stupid to implant it in some junior operative you don't hold any leverage over. I mean, realistically, what's stopping me from making them vote me in as CEO? On the positive side, there's a lot of player choice affecting the outcome of this questline, and there are a good number of different outcomes at the end. Another thing I really liked was the general aesthetic of Ryujin. Their office decoration is tastefully minimalist, managing to avoid looking either gaudy or barren. And everyone in management has some just immaculate drip. Their outfits look like a mix between a tailored suit and a kimono, colored in a nice contrast of red and black. It's one of the better portrayals of a futuristic fashion style I've seen, and it manages to avoid the common tropes of either being just a regular modern suit with minor modifications, or looking completely ridiculous. Right, now back to the main story. We just got the artifact from Neon and are about to leave. When we enter orbit, we're intercepted by a strange ship, unlike any we've seen before. They identify themselves as the Starborn, and demand we hand over the artifact, saying that us understanding the artifacts would be dangerous. Yes, the Starborn. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit here and reveal that we become a Starborn at the end. We become the Spaceborn with our space shout that we get from temples. You even get one of a special resource whenever you kill a Starborn, a bit like the Dragon Souls from Skyrim. Here they just temporarily speed up the recovery of the powers meter, but I kinda suspect that you would originally spend them to unlock the powers. Like in Skyrim, but that was changed for some reason. Overall,
it feels like Skyrim with guns.
We can hand over the artifact, escape by dramatically fast traveling out of there, or stand and fight. Walter says the ship's power levels are over 9,000, and at this point I was flying a discount space semi-truck called the Econohol with no points in any space combat skills. I figured to hell with it and invoked the stand your ground legislation the Freestar Collective probably has, and fought back. They never even took down my shields. Truly, this sets the Starborn up as a force to be reckoned with. Once we return to the lodge, they suggest some theories regarding the Starborn. A lost human colony, aliens, or, angels. Since there's no proof one way or the other, they decide to just keep looking for artifacts, so we do just that. After this encounter, we'll start running into Starborn ships both in space and while exploring planets, but they're not any more of a threat than our first encounter with them. Some of them didn't even fight back. Vladimir sends us on some filler quests to find 2 more artifacts in random copy-pasted points of interest, but this time heavily guarded by a single Starborn each. Once we return to the Eye, we find Vladimir's brought all our story followers there to do some repairs, and we have to help each of them. One of them will have a screw-up and need to stay at the Eye to fix the damage they caused. In my case, this was Andreja. Meanwhile, Vladimir has heard a rumor of another artifact being kept by a collector, Petrov, on his scrap heap ship guarded by an army of mercenaries. He's refusing all offers to buy the artifact, so Vladimir thinks we'll have to steal it. He also demands we take another follower with us, and won't take no for an answer. In my case, this was Sarah. When we reach the ship, we could attack it and board to fight our way to the artifact, but if we talk our way in, we have a few options. We can bribe some of the mercs for information, and they'll tell us the vault where the artifact's being kept has weak walls we could possibly just cut open from the right angle. Based on this, you might think we can deal with the situation stealthily by sneaking around back, cutting into the vault, and taking the artifact without being seen. Sadly, when you take the artifact, it will trigger an alarm, turning everyone on the ship hostile, so that's a no-go. Persuading him to take us to his vault didn't work either. Vladimir was right, he doesn't want to sell. I tried doing this a few different ways, but the only way I could take the artifact without killing anyone was to blast Petrov in the face before even talking to him. He would then surrender and tell his men to stand down, letting us take the artifact and leave without issue. Now there's a pacifist route with some chest hair. On our way out, the mercs call us pirates, and it's not like they're wrong. It's a bit hard to pin down Constellation's moral compass. They're portrayed as these idealist scientists and explorers, but they're ready and willing to lie, kill, and steal to satisfy their curiosity about what to them is just some weird metal plates. But speaking of piracy, this is as good a time as any to talk about the final faction questline, the Joint Crimson Fleet and UC SysDev questline. There are two different ways to start it. The first begins the first time we're arrested in UC space. In my playthrough, I get busted for organ smuggling. We're brought to the Vigilance, a spaceship operated by SysDev, basically a mix of the FBI and the Coast Guard. We're taken into an interrogation room where we meet the leader of SysDev, Commander Ikande. He gives us a simple choice: go undercover in the Crimson Fleet, the largest group of pirates in known space, or go to jail. This is a classic setup for a crime thriller, and I think it works both for petty crime and serious offenses. Whether you're a small-time smuggler in over your head, or a hardened killer looking to get out of a life sentence, the setup works. And in literally the only time me picking cyberneticist at the start was even mentioned, Ikande uses the origin we picked to justify why he thinks we can succeed at infiltrating the fleet. Compared to that, the other way of starting the quest is pretty lame. After we find Hadrian in the Vanguard questline and report back to Tuala, he just sends us to talk to Ikande, and he brings us on to infiltrate the Crimson Fleet without really explaining why he's using someone from the Vanguard of all places to do this and not one of his own people. It's also an unwelcome intrusion on the Vanguard questline. Oh, you've discovered an apocalyptic threat to us all? You better look into that. Or you could help this other guy with his criminal investigation. I'll leave it up to you. Once we agreed to go undercover, Ikande takes us to the bridge for a briefing. It's actually possible to attack him here and turn the ship hostile. Maybe letting the prisoner keep their weapons wasn't such a good idea. It doesn't even fail the questline. We just get an objective to seek out the Crimson Fleet with no objective marker. The objective description says joining the Crimson Fleet is our only chance to survive, but that's not really true. SysDev doesn't put out an EPP for the guy that just shot up their ship. They're even nice enough to wipe away any bounty we had before being arrested. If there's a manhunt on, they're really not putting their all into it. I'll get more into it later, but the consequences of siding with the pirates are way too lenient. If we do it the intended way, he'll inform us that he's loaded a container of Aurora, the only drug in the universe, into our ship. We're supposed to sell it to a shady dealer on Mars, and use that as a foot in the door to join the Crimson Fleet. He also warns us that we're gonna have to make some hard choices not to blow our cover, but pleads with us not to murder anyone unless it's absolutely necessary. His second-in-command, Toft, also wants us to bring her evidence of the Crimson Fleet's crimes, partially to prove to UC leadership that the Crimson Fleet's a big threat so SysDev gets more resources assigned to them, but more importantly, to get proof of wrongdoing needed to arrest high-ranking members of the Crimson Fleet. This isn't something that happens off-screen or in the epilogue either. There's a jail on the Vigilance where you can go talk to them, and they won't fight in the final battle if they're locked up. We go to the local office of the Trade Authority on Mars. They're an international corporation handling most interstellar trade, including stolen and illegal goods. These guys have offices in all major and some minor settlements and operate out in the open, despite the fact that them dealing in illegal stuff is an open secret. The shady dealer points us in the direction of her Crimson Fleet buddy, Adler Kemp. He's very German.
If you've got a whole shipment of this stuff, you're going to need to move it fast. But you're going to have to do something for us first.
And willing to take the Aurora off our hands if we do him a favor first. If we blasted our way off the Vigilance, we're instead approached by a guy who gives us a note from someone called Neva. She was impressed by how we handled SysDev and tells us to meet with Adler for a job. From then on, the quest plays out the same, other than SysDev being hostile from the start. Adler's job is to collect the debt from a drunken miner, and however we do so, he offers to introduce us to the fleet's second-in-command, Neva. There's also a slate behind him with evidence he's involved with the fleet. Turn it in, and you can later find him in the Vigilance's brig. We talk to Neva in orbit around Saturn, and she's not very likable. She maintains a hostile tone with us throughout this entire questline, and there are several times where you have multiple conversation options that all lead to her acting like you made the wrong choice. I don't think that's a bad thing though. The Crimson Fleet is basically a criminal cartel, and I don't imagine all high-ranking cartel members are nice to their subordinates. She gives us our initiation test. They have a strict policy that once you're in the fleet, you can't leave.
Because the only way out of our organization is with a warhead up your grav drive.
And she's found the location of a deserter on a medical transport. She wants the deserter dead and doesn't seem like she'll compromise on that point. We can kill him or let him live, but either way, she's conveniently under attack from some ecliptic mercenaries when we return, so she lets us join the fleet even if we let him live, since we helped her fight off the mercs. She tells us to meet her on the Key, the Crimson Fleet space station headquarters. But before that, we go back to the Vigilance and give Ikandi a status report. If we killed the traitor, he's disappointed but willing to give us another chance. And if we didn't, he's satisfied and reveals he hired the mercs that attacked Neva so we could come to her rescue. Apparently his stance against murder doesn't extend to PMCs.
You always have a choice. People have died because you were too stubborn to find a safer solution. This is not how UC SysDef operates. There was concern after what happened with the Regana that you might have trouble earning Neva's trust. Coming to her rescue ensured that would not be a problem.
Regardless, we head to the Key, where Neva gives us a tour of the place and introduces us to a bunch of minor characters before we meet the leader of the Crimson Fleet, Delgado. I like Delgado, despite a big issue I'll go into at the end of this questline. The voice acting and writing do a good job of selling him both as a charismatic leader capable of inspiring his followers, and a ruthless crime boss who demands complete obedience from those who work for him.
You stay loyal or you pay the consequences. Fleet before friends. Fleet before family. Fleet before yourself.
And he does demand total obedience. The Crimson Fleet seems to run on a strange contrast of iron discipline and pure anarchy. On one hand, both Delgado and Neva make it clear that members of the Crimson Fleet are expected to follow orders above all else. On the other hand, the first thing we see when boarding the Key is a disagreement between two pirates on how to split their take that ends with one of them dead on the ground. And the leadership seems to be fine with this. Now, I don't actually think this is an inconsistency. The fleet's leadership only cares about discipline when it comes to doing their jobs. Outside of that, it's up to their individual members to settle disputes and things like that. Not very efficient, but not every organization is efficient. The Key itself has some of the same design cues as Raider bases from the Bethesda Fallouts, which is to say it's dimly lit, poorly maintained, and there's crap lying all over the place. I guess Bethesda thinks outlaws are just slobs who can't be asked putting trash in a bin or cleaning up the piles of rubble strewn all over the floor. From a more practical point of view, it's probably the best hub in the game. It being a space station means it's more compact, meaning less running is needed, and all the stores are gathered in one convenient location. The downside, as you may have guessed from me using it as a bad example of excessive loading screens earlier on, is that there are too many loading screens here. But sadly, that's not an issue exclusive to the Key. There are too many loading screens everywhere in this game. From talking to Delgado and Neva, as well as listening to a recorded interview from the fleet's founder, Jasper Crix, we get a good idea of the fleet's backstory. It started with a prison riot on the icy world the Key orbits. The guards' mistreatment of the prisoners motivated them to rebel, and their negligence enabled the riot to succeed. The staff on the planet were quickly overwhelmed, with the prisoners even managing to commandeer some shuttles to board the UC station in orbit and take it over as well, turning it into their home base. From there, they would recruit more pirates to their cause and plunder UC transports far and wide until Crix disappeared, going away to look for a treasure he claimed would make the Crimson Fleet a real player on the galactic stage, on the same level as the major factions. This was about a century ago, but Delgado still wants to find the treasure, which he calls Crix's legacy, to let the fleet join the Big Boys Club. That's where we come in. As an initiation ritual, he wants us and another new recruit called Mathis to join him on an expedition to the prison in search for information on Crix's legacy. Shortly after we enter the prison, Delgado is separated from us and Mathis by a cave-in. Mathis wants to take the opportunity and kill Delgado to make money? Not sure how killing Delgado will make us rich, but he seems confident. Not that it matters, because, spoilers, we can't go through with this plan anyway. We don't know that yet though, so we continue making our way through the prison, which is a pretty nice set piece with some good environmental storytelling about how the prison break happened. In Jasper Crix's cell, we find the information we were after. Crix found out about a fully loaded money transport called the Legacy that was lost in a remote system and never recovered. Armed with this knowledge, we make our getaway using one of the shuttles left in the prison, which miraculously still works. Remember, the prison break was almost a century ago. Guess they built shit to last back in those days. When we take off, we also find out someone was waiting for us on board. What? I actually do know what caused this. You can assign crew members to hang out on your ship for some benefits, and when you get a new ship, they move to it. so when I sat down in the shuttle, she beamed in. Still, maybe that should have been taken into account when designing this mission. We bring the info from Crick's assault to Delgado, who's very excited about this new revelation. He figures Galbank, the owner of the ship and international central bank of both the UC and Freestar Collective, covered up the loss of the ship to maintain faith in them as a company, meaning it probably hasn't been looted in all this time. The only people who would know where the ship is would be Galbank themselves, so we need credentials from one of their higher-ups so we can access their archives. Luckily, Navas already planned a heist on a luxury liner together with the captain of the cruise ship, Rokov, who used to be in the fleet until he was kicked out. Wait a minute.
No one quits. No one retires. The only way out is death.
I guess they made an exception. Anyway, the cruise liner is also carrying a Galbank executive with a high enough access level. We're sent there to get his credentials, as well as optionally stealing the big expensive trophy for a charity event being held there, which was the original target of the heist before we found out the One Piece is real. We also get to decide what to do with Mathis. If you'll recall, he wanted us to help him kill Delgado, so naturally, we can choose to tell Delgado whether we thought he carried his weight or not. And based on that, he'll either get to join the fleet or be kicked out.
No one quits. No one retires. The only way out is death.
Is this rule even real? Also, I feel like there should at least be an option to tell Delgado Mathis was planning on killing him, but maybe that's just me. Either way, we meet back up with Ikande and give him a debrief. He's surprised we're still alive and reveals the last agent he sent got killed. I like this revelation. It paints Ikande in a pretty bad light, especially if we were blackmailed into this at the start. It gives us another reason why we might want to side with the Crimson Fleet when we inevitably have to pick sides. We'll let Ikande know about the legacy, and he wants us to play along for the time being and go through with the heist, so we do. We meet Rokov aboard the cruise ship and start investigating. The cruise ship is an alright set piece for a social challenge, but compared to the luxury spaceship we saw back in the Ranger's questline, this one just does not hold up. If we search Rokov's cabin, we can find evidence connecting him to the fleet, turn it into Toft, and he'll end up in the Vigilance's brig. Through the power of gossiping, persuasion, and bribery, we can unravel a conspiracy the executive, a Larry Dombrowski, was involved in to embezzle money from Galbank, and use that knowledge to blackmail him into giving us his credentials. We can even hand in the proof of the conspiracy to Toft to get him arrested. Alternatively, if we don't want to bother with all that talking bullshit, we can send Dombrowski straight to the Shadow Realm, grab his ID, and hit the bricks. We are a pirate after all. Ikande is pissed, but not enough to take us off the case, despite saying he would. He makes the same threat again, but it's hard to take it seriously after what happened the last time. However we get the credentials, we use them to enter the Galbank archive in New Atlantis, where there's an ecliptic hit squad waiting for us. Don't worry though, Ikande's stance on killing mercenaries is well established, so no one minds if you kill them all.
And I heard there were no casualties. Excellent work.
Except for the eclectic hit squad that you took down at the archives.
After clearing them out, we can access the archive and find the location of the legacy. When we deliver the info to Delgado, we learn there's a problem. The legacy is close to a gas giant, emitting enough EM radiation to make approaching it without destroying our ship impossible. We also can't find the ship's exact location since its transponder signal is heavily encrypted. Neva will look into stealing an experimental UC decryption device called the ComSpike that can trace the transponder, while Delgado tries to find a way around the EM field. Oh, and we can either vouch for Rokov or not. If we do, he's allowed back into the fleet. If we don't, he's not. While they're working on that, we check back in with Ikande, who's shocked to learn that the fleet knows about the highly classified ComSpike. He wants to continue playing along with their plan to steal it, and there's a moment I really like here. He says the reason the UC is unwilling to provide resources for his attack on the key is because they won't see the Crimson Fleet as a real threat unless they think there's a real risk of them getting their hands on the legacy. He's basically actively helping the Crimson Fleet's plan to get the legacy, and risking them succeeding to convince the Navy to give him the resources he needs to wipe them out. It lets us know he's kind of obsessed with destroying the Crimson Fleet, and while he definitely has stronger morals than his fleet counterparts, he's still willing to do questionable things to reach his goal. After that, we check back in with Neva, who has found the station the ComSpike is being developed at, and knows a smuggler who can take us there. Speaking of smugglers, let's talk about smuggling. There are a few items in this game with a yellow icon next to them indicating that they're contraband. Whenever you fast travel to a planet controlled by the UC or Freestar Collective, they'll scan your ship and arrest you if they detect any on board. These items are very valuable and lightweight, so selling them is worthwhile, and there are a few ways of doing it without being caught. You can smuggle them by getting a shielded cargo module from the Crimson Fleet ship mechanic or the shady guy at Red Mile. In addition to the shielded modules, you can invest in the deception perk and a scan jammer on your ship to increase the chances of not getting caught. But just having the shielded cargo was enough for me to get an 89% chance of getting through almost every scan, so they seem kinda pointless. Worse than that, having shielded cargo at all is kinda pointless, because you can sell contraband at any trade authority, including the ones on the Key in the Den, where you don't get scanned on entry, and therefore don't need cargo shielding. Also, how are they finding some of this stuff with a scan? How can they tell the stolen artwork is stolen? How does it know the Varun heretic writings are heretical? Why are Varun heretic writings even illegal in the UC and Freestar Collective? The way to acquire contraband isn't the most interesting either. Some points of interest and boarded ships belonging to criminal factions just have contraband lying around. There doesn't really seem to be any rhyme or reason as to which items are found where either. As far as I can tell, they're just randomly generated as loot in some areas. One funny example of this is from when I was attacking the factory, better known as the Factory, during the Ranger's questline. In a place well known for building mechs, I expected to find mech components, a contraband item. What did I find? Xeno-warfare tech. Why was that there? No idea. The only contraband you can actually buy is Aurora, but because of the way sale prices work in this game, you'll always spend more money buying the stuff than you do in reselling it elsewhere. This feels very half-assed. Contraband is just extra valuable loot you need to sell in a specific place. Smuggling is easy as hell to avoid, but even if you couldn't avoid it, the whole mechanic is just putting a special box on your ship to bypass the scan. Maybe if they placed contraband in places it logically would be found in, like mech parts and a mech factory, made the smuggling part an actual requirement, and made selling contraband more complicated than dumping it at the pawn shop, it would have been a bit better. Though they would probably need to make it more rewarding to compensate for the added time investment and challenge. One smuggler who might be up to that challenge is Neva's contact, Wan Dai Yu, who we meet in the well in New Atlantis. Our target is one of her stops, so she can get us aboard, but makes it clear she'll bail if we're discovered. But before we leave, we can inexplicably find some evidence in the back room of a nearby restaurant that we can turn in to have her arrested after the mission. Once we get to the station, she helps us sneak through over the intercom, helping us find a guard uniform and upgrading our authorization so we can talk to the scientist developing the comm spike. We learn from him the prototype is attached to a ship docked at the station, and we can convince him to let us take the ship in two ways. The first is to convince him we're a test pilot sent to take it out for a spin. If we do, he gives us the password and uniform we need to get past the security checkpoint. The guard at the checkpoint is even helpful enough to let us know to add the flight to the schedule, letting us leave without anyone suspecting a thing. The other way is to throw Juan under the bus, telling the scientist she's a Crimson Fleet pirate out to steal the comm spike. He sics the station commander on her and tells us to take the comm spike somewhere else to keep it safe, so everyone just lets us through to steal it. Juan gets away and is obviously furious, but Delgado doesn't mind. We got what we came for. This is a pretty good level, with a convincing amount of security for a top-secret military base, and probably the best social stealth level in the game. Of course, if you don't like that stealth bullshit, there is another way. We are a pirate after all. No one in the fleet cares, of course, but Ikandi is finally fed up and tries to arrest us. We can either go along with this and serve our sentence, or fight our way out. Either way, we have now made an enemy of Sistef. Just Sistef, not the whole UC. We just massacred an entire marine company and didn't get so much as a bounty. We can still land and do business in New Atlantis like it's no big deal. Whatever. Delgado's come up with a plan on how to deal with the EM field. The city of Neon is covered in a grid that absorbs lightning strikes for use in power generation, and he thinks the technology can be used to absorb the force of the EM field. We check in with another captain on Neon, Estelle Vincent, who isn't happy Delgado sent some rook to help her with her dangerous heist. Yeah, we're still just a rook, the same rank we started out as. I'm starting to think Bethesda is overcorrecting after all the complaints about the player becoming the leader of every faction in Oblivion and Skyrim, instead making the player a deputy, junior operative, and rook right up until the end of the faction questlines, despite it making very little sense to trust someone so junior with jobs this important. Anyway, she tells us we need to download the plans for the tech from the power plant in Neon's lower city, the Underbelly. She wants us to plant a virus in their system while we're there, and Delgado wanted us to keep her happy, so fine. To get inside, we'll need the access pass from one of the executives at the power company, so off we go. But before that, we can check the back room of the bar we're meeting Estelle in and find a piece of evidence that can get her arrested. We can infiltrate the power company's office using our elite Ryujin infiltration methods of just walking in through the front door to find some dirt we can use to blackmail the executive. We can find her in an opium den where we can blackmail her, convince her, or kill her in order to get her access pass. Before we leave, we can also grab some evidence behind the bar that will see her arrested if we turn it in. She's even extradited to the UC so she can hang out with the rest of our collection. We can then use the pass to enter the power plant and sneak or fight our way through to the plants. When we get there, we find out they're encrypted, and the only person with the cipher to decrypt them is the chief technician, Brayson Bayou, brother of Neon's ruler, Benjamin Bayou. We sneak or fight our way through to him, and he just hands it over to us willingly, to get back at his brother who makes fun of him behind his back. He then has an extended emotional heart-to-heart with us, talking about his childhood and his relationships with his dad and brother. We even help him brainstorm some ideas on new technologies the company could develop. He then keeps his word, letting us decipher the plans and upload Estelle's virus. Overall, a very productive break-in, for both sides. When we go to meet up with Estelle, we find Benjamin Bayou waiting for us instead. He wants to know who provided us with the virus, and we can blame either Estelle, Brayson, or ourselves. If we take the blame, Bayou says he'll frame us for murder in retaliation, but we're in a room alone with him. And there aren't any guards, so like many other times in this questline, we can simply... Oh, that's such bullshit. He's not even marked essential, he's just completely incorporeal. If we blame Brayson, Bayou says he'll be punished, while if we blame Estelle, he has her killed and we go directly to the key. Otherwise, we actually meet Estelle for real, and she's upset she put a bunch of work and cash into this plan with nothing to show for it, asking us to cover the difference for her. The sum she's asking for is basically nothing, so there's not much mechanical reason not to pay the pittance she asks for, but if we refuse on principle, she's so pissed she leaves the fleet on the spot.
No one quits. No one retires. The only way out is death.
That dealt with, we arrive back at the key to grave news. SysDef is massing ships for an assault on the key, and the defenses are in rough shape. Delgado's convinced the only thing that can get enough ships and captains there to hold them off is the money on the Legacy. So we install both the comm spike and the electrical grid on our ship before setting off. Since we use shipbuilding to install the modules, we can smoothly segue into shipbuilding. I didn't go too deep into it since the ship combat encounters in the main story were easy enough with the Econohull. I did build some ships of my own, but I never really min-maxed them or anything like that. Viewed from that perspective, the shipbuilding was pretty fun. It's a bit like playing with Lego, sticking the modular ship components together, and it was pretty easy to design a good variety of ships that didn't look completely hideous. There are some frustrating aspects to it though. Different ship technicians have access to different parts, which makes sense, but it makes it more annoying trying to combine parts from different manufacturers when designing a ship. Especially since you can't buy components without attaching them to a ship or transfer components from one ship to another. You also can't exit the shipbuilder without the ship being flyable, so you can't design a ship at the Deimos Star Yard without a cockpit and move it to Hopetown to put one of their cockpits on it. You would need to put a temporary cockpit on the ship just to leave the designer. I don't really see the benefit of these limitations. If it's for immersion, just let us hire a transport to move incomplete ships between star yards, or mail order parts from other manufacturers to a shipbuilder of our choosing. If we're still on speaking terms with Akande, we can check in with him first. He wants us to go through with the plan and bring the money to him, but why? SysDef doesn't need the money, and our ship is the only one capable of actually going to the Legacy. Wouldn't it be better to attack the Crimson Fleet first, and then secure the Legacy? Especially if our loyalty is in question. I'm also assuming he only got the resources for this attack because the fleet was closing in on the Legacy. But would he still get to keep those resources if we brought him the Legacy, putting it out of the Crimson Fleet's reach permanently? Whichever side we're on, we make our way to the Legacy through a thick asteroid-filled cloud with bolts of lightning striking our ship as we go. Once inside, we're greeted by one of the most atmospheric levels in the game. The ship's dark, and further in are the mummified remains of the crew, as well as audio recordings detailing their last moments. They were attacked and had their engines destroyed before managing to take out their attacker. Without engines, they drifted into the EM field, unable to escape, but managed to protect the systems on their ships using the EM shielding on the tanks holding the credits on board. This kept them alive in the short term, but didn't stop them from running out of food. Realizing they were doomed, the crew took their own lives one by one as starvation set in. All of this is told through environmental storytelling and audio logs with some pretty good voice acting.
What's happening to him, Captain? What's happening to all of us? First Bakara kills himself and now this? You have to help us! God damn it! I'm trying! I thought Bakara would be okay! How the hell did I know he'd never come out of that room alive?
It's easily one of the best set pieces in the game. My only complaint is having to fight a bunch of robots and turrets to proceed through the level. I feel like this detracts from the experience rather than adding to it. This level was good enough to keep my attention without jingling keys over my head. Eventually, we reach the cargo bay and get our view of the treasure. A vast warehouse filled with row after row of chests full of credits. But wait, how are we gonna take this all with us? Easy. Starfield's credits are a digital cryptocurrency, a prediction of the future that was outdated before the game even launched. This means we can simply download all the credits on a handheld storage device we can carry in our pocket. But wait, if we can take this entire load of credits with us in our pocket, why did they need a warehouse full of these big chests? Well, in the control room, we also discovered the fate of Jasper Cricks. He found a way to locate and reach the Legacy almost a century before us, with only one catch. His protection against the EM field failed when he docked, leaving him stranded just like the Legacy's crew before him. Right before he suffered the same fate as them, he was contacted by his second-in-command, thinking his rescue was at hand. Unfortunately for him, she realized that if he were to disappear, the fleet would be hers, so she sabotaged his EM shielding before the mission and left him there to die, alone in a sea of credits he couldn't spend. Next to his body is his weapon, a special variant of the Magshare rifle with a rare unique skin. The regular Magshare is pretty strong and this thing is amazing. If you can keep up with its high ammo consumption, it can effortlessly shred almost all enemies in seconds. We download all the dosh onto a data core we found on the ship. A side effect of this is that the money tanks were holding the EM field at bay, so without them, the Legacy starts rapidly falling apart. We make our getaway in a desperate escape sequence where, unlike before, I don't actually mind the robots attacking us. Here it adds to the experience rather than detracting from it. And as we undock, we see the Legacy go down behind us. We now get the choice all of this has been leading to. Do we take the money to the fleet, or SysDef? Whoever we side with, this is when the evidence collection becomes relevant, as the captains Delgado is hiring to defend the key are the same people who are locked up in the Vigilance's brig if we hand in evidence of their crimes. This is pretty cool. There's a tangible mechanical consequence if we screw over our fellow pirates when siding with the fleet, or if we neglect the evidence gathering when siding with SysDef. If we side with SysDef, we jump to the Vigilance, which is under attack by the Crimson Fleet. After defeating the attackers, we hand Ikande the money and get orders from Toft. We're to help SysDef destroy the key's defensive batteries before boarding the station itself. It's a lengthy space combat segment, and as I said before, the space combat in this game isn't great, so let's just move on to when we board the station. There are a lot of pirates on board, but the level scaling seemed a bit off. I entered the station at level 42, and a few pirates were around that level, but most were around half that, and some were in the single digits. They were so weak that the Revenant, the unique weapon from the Legacy, would one-shot them. And it's one of the fastest firing weapons in the game. I do like how we have to kill almost all the named pirates as we move through the station, some of whom were pretty likable, like Bog the bartender and Jazz the mechanic. Add some moral complexity into the mix. After killing a whole Caribbean's worth of pirates, we head upstairs and confront Delgado. He's obviously bitter about the betrayal and has started overloading the key's reactors, refusing to go down in history as the man who lost it to the UC. We can kill him or talk him down, and if we do talk him down, we can later find him in the Vigilance's brig, finishing our pirate Pokédex. We then return to a hero's welcome on the Vigilance.
Great job!
The fleet's entire leadership is either dead or in custody, except for Neva. She led an attack on the Vigilance during the space battle and then disappeared, with her current whereabouts unknown. It's a shame. Out of all the members of the Crimson Fleet, she's the only one I really wanted to kill. Still, we're told the Crimson Fleet is in shambles. Ikade has even convinced the brass to give us part of the money from the Legacy, and it's a pretty penny, possibly the largest single cash reward in the whole game. Though I wish it wasn't here. I think the material reward should be higher for making the selfish outlaw choice than making the good lawful choice. We also have an opportunity to talk with Delgado in the brig. He's indignant, claiming the attack on the Crimson Fleet was an act of war, that the UC snuffed out the fleet just to eliminate a competitor. He talks about the fleet's lofty ideals, but you can't ask him what those ideals actually are. Individualism? Anarchy? He never says, but perhaps we can find the answers in the Crimson Fleet path. If we take the treasure to the key, the ending plays out largely the same, but in reverse. Instead of attacking the batteries, we defend them, and instead of boarding the key, we board the Vigilance. One difference is that all the captains from the previous missions show up to help us, assuming they're not dead or in jail. There's even a confrontation with Ikande at the end that's very similar to the one with Delgado. He's rigged the ship to blow, and we can either talk him down or kill him to stop it. If we talk him down, we can ironically find him and Toft locked in the Vigilance's brig later. I guess turnabout is fair play. We return to the quay where we can talk to our fellow captains before checking in with Delgado, who's understandably very happy we delivered him not only the treasure, but also the Vigilance. With these new resources, the fleet will be able to buy more ships, recruit more pirates, and finally become a real major faction. What we don't get is an explanation of what ideals and ideology the fleet fights for. For the grunts, it's greed. They just want to get paid, but Delgado seemed to have greater ambitions than that. You also can't tell Delgado what happened to Crix, which is a real missed opportunity. Overall, this questline was really good, but I feel not giving the Crimson Fleet a concrete ideal to fight for lessens them a bit as a faction. As it is in the game, they're basically just a criminal syndicate that only exists not to compete with each other and occasionally cooperate on jobs. And even if they wanted Delgado to be this ideologue espousing ideals the rest of the fleet didn't really care about, I think it would have been better if he was a bit more specific about what his vision of the fleet actually is. Without knowing that vision, all the moral complexities coming from immoral acts by SysDef and barely any from redeeming elements in the Crimson Fleet. They're just greedy criminals whose only redeeming quality is that they don't use foul language.
What the heck?
The SysDef side is more clear. It's a regular undercover crime thriller in a sci-fi setting, and they pull it off pretty well. I especially like the evidence gathering, and seeing the Crimson Fleet captains be arrested was a pleasant surprise I didn't expect from a Bethesda game. Another negative is that the consequences for the decision at the end don't really make sense. I talked about it a bit earlier, but if you think about it, the reward for siding with the Crimson Fleet should have been that you get your share of the money, and in exchange, you end up on the most wanted list for aiding and abetting the largest organized crime group in the known universe. While in the SysDef ending, you would forfeit your share of the money in exchange for staying on the good side of the law. Instead, the only mechanical difference after the questline ends is whether Crimson Fleet pirates out in space are hostile or not. I get that making the player a fugitive in the UC might not be a good idea, as you don't want to lock them out of all that content. Maybe the player would need to put on a disguise? I've read some people thinking it's weird that you can join both the Vanguard and the Rangers, but that's nothing compared to siding with the Crimson Fleet and slaughtering SysDef, only to still be made a Class 1 citizen and given the free luxury apartment paid for by the state at the end of the Vanguard questline.
You can imagine my surprise when I was informed you were also the agent involved in the debacle between SysDef and the Crimson Fleet. Despite all your checkered histories with the Xeno Warfare Unit or SysDef, the Cabinet still believes you all earned a display of gratitude for what you've done. Today, we will be adding 3 new Class 1 citizens to our ranks.
Now back to the main quest. We had just stolen the artifact from Petrov and we're heading back to put it with the rest. Now you might think I've done a disservice to the main quest by constantly interrupting it and getting sidetracked by other stuff, but consider what we've done in the main quest so far. Find artifact, deliver it to Constellation. Find artifact, deliver it to Constellation. Find artifact, deliver it to Constellation. You get the point. Other than saving Barrett and visiting the temple, the entire main quest up to now has been finding identical looking artifacts and putting them in a room so they can float around and look pretty. If you want to be charitable, you can say this episodic structure is intentional, and for a similar reason that TV shows like Star Trek use an episodic structure. For the TV shows, it's to ensure that viewers can tune into any episode and understand what's going on without the context of having seen the episodes before it. While for Starfield, it lets players get sidetracked in the middle of the main quest without losing track of where they are. On the other hand, this is repetitive and dull. Also, I can't remember a lot of Star Trek episodes where they looked for identical metal plates in random caves. Though I don't want to hear anyone saying all Star Trek episodes were better written than this. This has nothing on Sub Rosa. So once again, we return to Constellation, artifact in hand, but this time, something new happens. There's a distress call from the Eye, which has been attacked by a Starborn, who severely wounded one of our followers before saying he was going to the lodge, where we are. This leaves us with a choice. We can stay here and protect the artifacts, or head up to the Eye and help our comrades. If we stay, we're attacked by the Starborn that hit the Eye, a guy called the Hunter, who we could actually meet earlier hanging out at the bar in Nikhil City in New Atlantis, where we could have a pair of brief philosophy talks with him. Now he's making copies of himself and attacking us with powers similar to our own. He's a real bullet sponge, and if we manage to whittle him down, he's only gone for a few seconds. Since we can't beat him, we have to run, escaping through the Constellation basement into the well, where the hunter lives up to his name and keeps hunting us, now with the guards joining in to fight him. This continues to the spaceport, where we escape on our ship. In space, the hunter contacts us to let us know that he's impressed and that he'll stop chasing us now to see how this develops. And if we drove him away, he even gives us a unique gun. We then head to the Eye, where we're actually too late. Our wounded follower is dead. If we went up to the Eye at the start, we can save them before returning to the lodge, but by the time we get back, the hunter has already attacked and killed the follower we left down there, so either way, someone has to die. The funny thing is, when we go to the Eye, we don't even provide medical attention to the wounded follower. We just ask if they're okay, and that's all it takes to save them. I'm also a little confused by the timeline in this path. Judging by how things play out if we stay, the hunter arrives right after we leave. So while he's there, we run to the tram, take the tram to the spaceport, run to our ship, fly up to the Eye, save our follower, fly back to the spaceport, run back to the tram, take the tram to the Mass District, and run back to the lodge. In all that time, he's only managed to kill the one follower we left behind and hasn't had time to take the artifacts. He seems to be taking his time. Also, the running section is accompanied by the usual calm, relaxing New Atlantis music. Really sells the urgency of the situation. The game does have a pretty neat system for determining which followers are in the line of fire. It's the two with the highest relationship rating, so the ones the player used the most, and probably liked the most. This is pretty clever. It reminds me a lot of the Vermeer decision in the first Mass Effect, where you need to choose if Kaidan or Ashley dies. The issue there was that Kaidan and Ashley were the least interesting characters on the crew, with the most people saving Ashley, presumably for the romance option. In Starfield, instead you're going to have to choose between the characters you like the most, which would have theoretically had a bigger impact, though the issue here is that none of our followers are that interesting, so the improvement isn't really felt much. This definitely is the best mission in the main quest so far, and a much needed breath of fresh air after all the artifact gathering. The choice had the potential of being interesting, but the boring characterization of the followers failed to live up to that potential. The chase through New Atlantis was pretty good, with one major problem. I like it when games put an action set piece in the safe hub area, but you can only really do that once without undermining its status as a safe hub area, which is where the Terramorph attack enters the picture. Back when talking about that, I mentioned the moment was lessened somewhat, and this is what I was talking about. Having two similar set pieces in the same place lessens the individual set pieces. If I had to suggest a change, I would move one of these to a different city, either Aquila City or Neon, though that would require a major rewrite given that the Lodge and the Eye are in orbit around New Atlantis respectively. While we're on the subject of followers, let's talk about the follower quests, starting with Barrett's. The initial impression I got of him from what little I saw of the pre-release marketing was that he's a smarmy jokester with a quip for every situation.
You know what I hate about these pirates? Completely resistant to my otherwise irresistible charm.
In other words, I thought he'd be completely insufferable. But the jokes aren't as relentless as I thought they'd be, and he's actually pretty laid back. So he's not insufferable, he's just kinda boring. He comes across as a kinda normal person, the kind of person you might want as a coworker, but not as a supporting character in a story. In conversation, he reveals that he used to be married to a guy named Irvin, another member of Constellation, who got caught in a battle between the UC and Freestar Collective during the Colony War and died. In Barrett's first quest, he gets two for some reason, he finds a secret message in an old voicemail Irvin left where he said he was being framed for something and asked Barrett to help clear his name. This was 20 years ago, but Barrett still wants to investigate it, and he wants us to pay for it. Sure. It turns out Irvin was sued by a mining corporation for hunting a predator to extinction near their mine. This caused the herbivore population to explode, which damaged their mine. Irvin lost the case, not even entering a plea, and the one witness the defense had withdrew before the trial. The mining company got a huge insurance payout from their lost mine, so Barrett figures Irvin was framed as part of an insurance fraud scheme. He wants to prove that by going to Gagarin, the planet this all took place on, to clear Irvin's name. He's even got Irvin's original lawyer on board to relitigate. So we go to Gagarin, which is a neat little town. It used to be the UC's main mech factory that got the Rust Belt treatment after mechs were outlawed. There we team up with the lawyer and discover that the mine was shut down for unrelated reasons and that Irvin was framed for the insurance money. We then get the witness from the original trial to agree to provide his testimony, along with a character witness for him if we want to go the extra mile. With all that sorted, we hand the case over to the lawyer, and that's the end. We never get to see the trial, we're just told what happens after the fact by Barrett, and from what I can tell, the outcome never changes. Irvin's record is cleared, but not because we proved he was innocent. It was because he was dead when the verdict was reached, making all that investigating pointless. This is not a very good quest. The outcome doesn't change based on our actions, and the solution for Irvin seems like it could have been achieved without the whole investigation. Not to mention that this premise isn't very strong for a companion quest. It feels just like any other random side quest, which in this game is a pretty low bar. Barrett does have another quest where he wants to get powers of his own, which is mechanically identical to all the other temples in the game, with a kind of interesting conversation at the end of it. The power he gets is to summon a copy of himself from an alternate universe, and he has a lengthy talk with the copy, who's from a universe where Irvin is still alive and they have a kid, but where the colony war is still going on after 20 years. After an epic battle against a single Starborn, the copy disappears back into his own universe, and the copies summoned after that are just mindless automatons. Despite its short length and reuse of the common temple setting, I actually like this one more than his real follower quest. Next we can look at Space Cowboy Sam Coe. His character is that he has a daughter and complains a lot. He complains about his dad, complains about his ex, complains about his famous ancestor, and most of all, complains about his family name. He never asked for this. Him being a parent is his second trait, and despite his lifestyle of adventuring, he's not an absent father, because he brings his daughter along with him on the ship. Given how often we end up in space dogfights, this seems really reckless.
Can I have a pet? A pet? Aww, come on, please. I need somebody to talk to while I'm on the ship by myself.
Give him an inch. We'll see, Gum-Gum.
And other than that, his parenting style isn't entirely consistent.
Well, there's no way in hell I'm letting Cora land here. Ikuchi's a lot of fun. They even bring Cora here every now and then.
On the positive side, Elias Tufexis does a great job as his voice actor. His daughter Cora isn't so bad though, mainly because she's written less like a real kid and more like the ideal of what a perfect kid should be like. She rarely complains, acts rationally and with more emotional maturity than her parents, loves to read, and seems to get along with everyone. His quest centers around his daughter and his ex, a ranger called Lillian. She hasn't been replying to Cora's messages, so Cora thinks something's wrong. Lillian was working in Neon, so we check in with a local ranger, Price, who doesn't like Sam because he left the Rangers, and because he keeps sending Lillian hate mail. We can convince him to give us the scoop on Lillian in a few different ways, one of which is being a ranger. It's nice when faction membership has benefits like this where it makes sense. He lets us check Lillian's desk where we find a slate, saying she was paying an informant a frankly insultingly low amount of money, and we get their address. Lacking any other leads, that's where we go. Cora picks the lock. Yeah, we're bringing her with us for some reason, and in the apartment, we find the mutilated corpse of the informant. Cora isn't faced though.
Dad, I've seen worse. He's just dead.
We find a slate indicating Lillian was infiltrating a syndicate base on another planet, so that's our next stop. Cora also bullies us into being allowed to tag along. We literally can't say no, even though we absolutely should. After landing, we make radio contact with Lillian, whose cover is about to be blown. She's justifiably pissed we brought Cora, but is willing to put that on hold until we get her out of there. So we do just that and meet up with her to have a talk back on the ship. One of the Syndicate's leaders wants to expand off of Neon, so Lillian wants to attack one of their weapon stockpiles to lure her out and kill her. We're supposed to get the location of the stockpile from one of their transports, so we disable the ship, board it, take out the crew, and get a 15,000 credit bounty for piracy and murder. What? Yeah, it turns out we're supposed to destroy the ship and get the information out of the wreckage. I guess the designer kinda forgot about boarding when making this quest. We head to the stockpile, trigger the alarm, and find out Lillian has some seriously lacking intel.
We can count on at least one ship being within range, maybe two. Valerie has more robots than men, so expect hard targets.
During the fight, there are either 6 ships landing troops, or 2 ships making very quick round trips ferrying in more troops. The troops themselves are mostly regular Syndicate foot soldiers, with a few robots here and there. After they're dealt with, she has an extended talk with Sam where she says Sam's putting Cora in danger by keeping her on the ship. She's right, of course, but even if we agree with her, Sam wins the argument, and Lillian is satisfied by Sam offering to let Cora visit her more often. This quest wasn't as bad as Barrett's quest. It had more stuff going on and a more exciting climax, but Sam's irresponsible parenting and the inability to meaningfully oppose it really dragged the whole thing down. I wish there was a way to convince him that repeatedly putting his kid in mortal danger is worse than the other options he has. Though I can sorta see where he's coming from when Sarah's best idea is putting her education in the hands of fucking Mateo. Speaking of Sarah, she's next. Her backstory is all about the various jobs she's had, first in the Navy, then the UC Navigator Corps, their unit of explorers, and finally Constellation. Her quest is about an event that happened when she served in the Navy during the Colony War. She was third in command on a warship, and when both the captain and the first officer died in battle, command fell to her. The ship was badly damaged, and by the time she ordered the crew to evacuate, their escape shuttle was damaged. The last she saw of it was it falling towards a nearby planet, out of control. She escaped on another shuttle before being rescued and now has survivor's guilt, blaming herself for the deaths of her crew. She now wants to return to the site of the battle to find the remains of her crew and give them a proper burial. Wait, the Colony War was almost 20 years ago, so in all that time neither she nor the UC went back to bury the crew? Why wait until now? Anyway, we talked to Admiral Logan to find her campsite, where she thinks she can find the location of the shuttle that held her crew. This guy's the leader of the UC Navy, and we just rock up to his office without an appointment. He's angry at her because she resigned from the Navy, but he's willing to help us when we explained we're trying to pay our respects to fallen UC servicemen. Now that we know where it is, we can visit Sarah's landing site, which is proof that Bethesda can still make good-looking environments when it's actual human designers making them. There, we managed to find the location of the other shuttle, which is in another good-looking environment. We discover a building made from materials scavenged from the shuttle, and inside is a little girl. She's the child of 2 survivors from Sarah's ship, but she's the only one left, her parents and the rest of the survivors having already died. Man, if Sarah felt guilty before now, I can't imagine this has made things better. Sarah could have gone looking for them right after she was rescued. She should have gone looking for them right after she was rescued. These people are dead because of her. There was no reason to wait almost 2 decades to start looking for them.
Yeah? Well, I wish you wouldn't have taken so long.
We recover their dog tags and convince Sona, that's the kid's name, to come with us as we leave. When we hand in their dog tags to Admiral Logan and explain what we find, he hits us with this line.
I'm sorry. I had no idea. How could we have possibly known?
Maybe you could have checked? Sarah's not the only one at fault here. This is a massive L for the UC Navy. We then talk to Sona at the lodge, where she's apparently been adopted by Constellation and will be living there from now on. I would have assumed she would be placed in a foster home, but maybe those don't exist in space. The quest ends with Sarah having found peace with her past, the revelation that she left her crew to die being just what she needed to set her mind at ease. In case you couldn't tell, I didn't think this quest was very good. The worst part is that it could have been fixed relatively easily. There just needed to be some reason why she couldn't have gone looking for the crew before now. Maybe she tried but couldn't find them, and some new technology was the thing that allowed her to find the shuttle. This would let the quest have the intended emotional beats instead of the constant thought that these unfortunate events are all caused by Sarah being an idiot. Last is Andreja, and I found her to be the most interesting follower. When she's introduced, she's held back and reserved, which makes sense given her checkered past as a smuggler. But as her relationship with us improves, she opens up to reveal her past as a member of the game's enigmatic third faction, House Varun. This is interesting because they're a lot more alien than the other factions. A theocracy worshipping a cosmic entity called the Great Serpent that went to war with the rest of humanity in the past. They've now mostly gone into isolation, relying on smugglers to import things they can't produce themselves. This was Andreja's job, and it was treated with such secrecy that she wasn't even taught the location of their home system, meaning she can't go back home without help. Her quest begins with her mentioning she had become friends with some unaffiliated smugglers in the past, but was separated from them when they were attacked by Varun zealots. She was the fastest to reach her ship and left immediately without her friends, but now she wants to find out what happened. We find the first one, Aaron, dead in his safe house, and a house full of Varun zealots. They didn't kill him though, he was dead before they got there. We also find a slate from the other smuggler Andreja left behind, Jada. She's joined the Vanguard and is looking for the person she thinks is responsible for the attack, a guy called Tomisar Kedik, who Andreja reveals is her handler from House Varun. We find Jada and help her fight off some zealot ships before coming on board to have a talk. She accuses Andreja of being in on the attack, saying her handler, Tomisar, told the zealots where they were on behalf of the Varun High Council. Then the conversation's interrupted by a zealot whose monologue is so long that it outlasts the battle, continuing even after his ship is destroyed.
Always hurts me that you escaped the fate you deserved. But now, the serpent sets my mind at ease, and in his name, I will cleanse your filth from this universe.
He does say that the High Council was behind the attack on the smugglers, so we go to the abandoned station used by Tomisar as a hideout to confront him. He doesn't give any answers though, he just insists he has no idea what she's talking about, and I'm not really sure if he's lying or genuinely doesn't know what we're talking about. We can let him live and somehow try to tell the High Council about what he's done. We can convince her to kill him or kill him ourselves. Either way, Andreja's relationship with her people might be irreparably damaged. Looking at all the followers and their quests, I liked Andreja and her quest the most. It had the most interesting premise, featured an enemy we don't fight that much in the rest of the game, and gave some more details on the faction with the least content devoted to it. The quest also has an interesting potential if the ending is considered in the upcoming Shattered Space DLC, which seems to focus on House Varun. Sarah's quest gets second place, only held back by the timeline issue. Sam's quest is a fun action romp featuring some highly responsible parenting, and Barrett's quest would have been boring if it was a generic side quest on Gagarin. As a follower quest, it's beyond the pale. Back in the main quest, we decide it isn't safe to keep the artifacts at the lodge, so we can either put them on our ship or at an outpost. But it feels like keeping them on the ship makes the most sense. If the lodge in the middle of the biggest city in known space isn't secure, how safe would the artifacts be at my mining outpost in the middle of nowhere? After securing the artifacts, we return to New Atlantis through the devastated spaceport. Wait a minute. When we reach the lodge, Mateo has a suggestion. During the attack, he heard the hunter mention something called the Unity, which he's also heard from Keeper Aquilus, a priest from the Sanctum Universum, a religion in this setting. He wants us to talk to the priest to see if he might be able to help us. In a sane world, this would be dismissed outright as completely ridiculous. It's like if aliens attacked, said something about a trinity, and you went to a priest for answers because they also talk about trinities a lot.
It can't be a coincidence.
But of course it turns out he's correct. When we talk to the Keeper, he tells us an old story about a pilgrim that met the founders of the other religions, House Varun and the House of Enlightenment, and gave them each a part of the truth before going off to contemplate his addition to infinity, or as he called it, infinitum addendum. The Keeper thinks there might be a hidden message in the story, so he sends us to speak with the representatives of the other religions for more dollar store Dan Brown deductions. The guy from the House of Enlightenment tells us a story heavily focusing on the number 2, while the imprisoned zealot representing House Varun recants a tale emphasizing the numbers 4 and 120. When we return to Aquilus, he figures the 2 from the Enlightened story refers to the second planet in a system, and that the 120 and 4 from the Varun story are coordinates for a place on the planet's surface. That leaves only the system, so he takes the phrase infinitum addendum from his own story, arbitrarily removes the finite and add, leaving only in and dum. Indum is the name of a system, so now we have a destination. This feels like predicting the end of the world from numbers in the Bible, but whatever, it worked. So we travel to the specified coordinates on the second planet in the Indum system, where we find a rather charming abandoned homestead.
You know, this abandoned homestead is actually rather charming.
Containing a series of writings from the Pilgrim. In order to unlock the final room, we need to answer some questions on his computers, and those answers are found in the writings. A clever way of encouraging the player to not only read them, but pay attention to them. Or just brute force it by guessing. It's a multiple choice test and there aren't that many options, and there's no penalty for getting it wrong. For now, we find a new destination in the last writing, an island on Hyla 2. No coordinates this time, but apparently there's only one island on this planet, so we get a map marker to travel to. You can actually go here right after delivering the very first artifact to Constellation and skip the entire main quest up to this point. though it's pretty clear it's not an intended path and has some bizarre effects on the main quest. Check out Tomato Anus' Starfield speedrun explained video for more details. It's where I learned about this. After solving the puzzle on the island, we get a new quest marker where we find the hunter's ship, Scorpius. He's pleasantly surprised we found him, happy he didn't continue hunting us after his attack on Constellation. He invites us over to his ship where he's having a meeting with another Starborn called the Emissary so they can give us some answers. Once we board their ship, we have a chat with Daft Punk, who revealed that the Emissary is the one who attacked us and got humiliated over Neon. They explain that when all the artifacts are gathered, it will create the Unity, a gateway to other universes that turn the people that step through into Starborn. The Emissary then reveals themselves as the follower that died to the Hunter, in my case Andreja. In their universe, we're the one that died, and she finished the main quest instead of us. They explain their philosophies. The Emissary wants to control who gets to access the Unity, while the Hunter has a more might makes right approach, saying whoever has the strength to defeat all the other claimants is the only one that deserves access to the Unity. He then reveals his identity as Keeper Aquilus of all people, or at least one version of him. This isn't his first rodeo, he's done this loads of times, gathering the artifacts, getting empowered by the temples, then going to another universe to do it all over again. This is the furthest any version of us has gotten though, so they both want us to side with them, to give their side an edge over the other. Before we leave, the Emissary tells us to look for more answers on Earth's moon and gives us a key to access the place. Now that we have some more context, we can ask exactly who the Pilgrim is, and if you're paying attention to the writings and the talk with the Hunter, it's pretty clear that it's Aquilus. He's a different version of the Hunter that gave up on the endless rat race, and instead helped us by showing us the way to the meeting, while trying to nudge us to stay in this universe when we reach the Unity. Though it's not entirely clear how or why he implanted the stories in the other religions to give us the coordinates, rather than just giving us the full story himself. We return to the lodge and tell them what we've learned, though only Mateo, Noel, Walter, and Vladimir have anything to say. Vladimir says he's found the location of the last unclaimed artifacts, but we'll start by going to the moon. The Emissary didn't give us any coordinates, but we find the way using the power of quest markers. The objective is an ancient research station we can enter using the Emissary's key. Inside we find a bunch of audio logs from the researchers that used to work there. They were running a supercomputer, and after finding out they were working with NASA to invent the Grav Drive, the Settings FTL device, we head to the remains of NASA at Cape Canaveral on Earth. As I mentioned a little while ago, Earth has lost its atmosphere, which apparently turned it into a barren, procedurally generated wasteland with only a few landmarks still standing. For Cape Canaveral, this might make sense. Based on my extensive research of looking at Google Street View, this place could conceivably look like it does in the game if the vegetation and oceans were removed. The other landmarks make a bit less sense. They're all real buildings in major cities, like the Shard or the Empire State Building, but when you visit them, they're the only structure left standing in a sea of sand. I do understand that modeling a ruined version of London and New York is a bit much to ask for, but seeing these buildings all on their own just looks weird. And the only one that feels like it could outlast the city around it like this is the pyramids. After a bit of platforming through the NASA launch tower, we enter the Space Museum beneath it. The museum and the lab are both well designed, combining real-life space exploration history with the fictional stuff. The whole place also contains audio logs from the researchers who were studying an object found on Mars with strange properties that affected gravity around it. It was an artifact, and the things they discovered when studying it enabled them to create the Grav Drive. But their experiments made Earth's magnetic field fail, causing solar radiation to start stripping away the atmosphere. There's a log from the lead scientist that admits he knew creating the Grav Drives would destroy life on Earth, but thought humanity's future as an interstellar species was worth the sacrifice of our homeworld. He learned all this when he touched the artifact on Mars, which gave him a vision where he spoke to an alternate version of himself that told him everything he needed to know to make the Grav Drive work. This is a bit confusing though. The lead scientist was shown a vision of the future by who exactly? Was it a Starborn version of himself from another universe? Why did the vision he got upon touching the artifact tell him prophecies of the future when it just played us music and showed us a trippy view of space? This is my problem with a lot of stories featuring multiverses. If you think about them too hard, they tend to kind of unravel. The artifact's still there in the lab, so we grab it and are contacted by the Hunter and the Emissary, who are waiting for us outside. We need to fight our way through a bunch of other Starborn to get to them though. I guess they're after the artifact too. They're different from most other enemies because they can use Starborn powers like turning invisible, but they're still not much of a threat. Turns out the incomprehensible power of infinity isn't that impressive compared to the power of a gun. When we meet the duo outside, they give us their takes on what we've learned. The Hunter thinks giving up Earth to settle the stars was the right move, the emissary does not. This is when we pick which one of them we want to side with. But in a shocking twist, we can decide to side with neither of them, causing them to put their differences aside and ally against us. They say they'll wait for us at the buried temple, wherever that is. But wait, you didn't forget about those artifacts Vladimir wanted us to go find, did you? There are two of these. One is a pretty good quest with an interesting premise. The other is a copy-pasted point of interest I had already been through a copy of before. More like point of disinterest. This isn't great for the pacing right before the end. You can choose whether you want to do these or go to NASA first. Maybe it would have been better if the good one was set before NASA and the pointless busy work one was just removed. Anyway, let's look at the good one. When we arrive in orbit, we receive a garbled distress message about some kind of disaster that took place at a research lab on the surface. But when we check out the research lab, they claim they never sent a distress message and that everything's fine. As we move through the lab, we start shifting back and forth to a Zergified version of the lab, covered in alien growths and filled with hostile aliens. There was an explosion at this alternate lab that caused a gas leak and a fire, and there's only one survivor, Raphael, who sent the distress message we picked up. The aliens are actually just a native species that moved in after the people died. They had nothing to do with the accident. In the intact version of the lab, we learn that Raphael stopped the accident at the cost of his own life, cutting off the access to their basement lab in the process where they were researching an artifact. Since Raphael had made his way upstairs in the other universe, they figure the way down is still intact there, and provide us with a device that lets us control when we shift. The research director theorizes that whichever universe we shut down the experiment in will become reality for our universe, meaning there's a choice to be made. Do we save Raphael or the rest of the research team? A bit like the trolley problem. Except, if you find Raphael's corpse in the lab, he's carrying instructions on how to finish the experiment. Follow them and you can save everyone. I guess this rewards exploration, but there's no hint that this was possible. We can even ask the director if there's another way, and she says there isn't. There isn't even anything in the instructions hinting that completing the experiments will have this outcome. You have to kinda just YOLO it to see what it does. It also kind of undermines the trolley problem aspect if there's a third rail with no one on it that you can divert the trolley to. Besides that, this is a good quest with an interesting premise taking good advantage of the multiverse aspect of the main story. Once you get to the lab, it's also a good combat encounter, with the Klandathu universe filled to the brim with bugs, and the regular universe filled to the brim with robots. Even navigation gets a twist added to it because you need to move between universes to bypass obstacles that only exist in one universe. Visually, the level is great too. I like the infested aesthetic, and seeing the same rooms in both universes really lets it sink in just how far this place has fallen. However we solve things, we grab the artifact and can finally head to the buried temple that I guess we just figured out the location of on our own to finish the game. In space, we're confronted by whoever we sided against. After defeating them, we land at the temple, alongside our ally if we have one. On the surface is a large ecliptic base with all the occupants butchered by the Starborn, who then tried to stop us with various powers. One creates a bunch of copies of itself, one raises the dead ecliptic mercs as its thralls, and one creates copies of us. But none of them can resist the power of the gun. The set piece is alright. The progression as we go from the surface base to the underground base, then finally to the Starborn ruins is a pretty good final arena. And the hordes of dead ecliptic really add to the atmosphere of the place. On the way, we pass through some anomalies that show us flashbacks to when we first touched the artifact, when we met Vatic, and an alternate universe where we died. Very profound? Once inside the temple, we find whoever we didn't side with, and we can either fight them or use the persuasion minigame to convince them to give us their artifacts. And because of how that minigame works, we can't fail. Especially not if we have an auto-persuade saved up. The temple also holds the final artifact, so once we grab it, we have everything we need to enter the Unity. We can talk to the rest of Constellation before we leave. Our story followers are ready to take the leap, but everyone else stays behind, with one exception. Sam takes Cora with him. I'm sure her mother would have something to say about that, but she's not here, and we can't talk him out of it. When we assemble all the artifacts and jump, we end up in a field of stars with a big sphere in the middle, along with us. We talk to ourselves, and we aren't the best conversation partner. All I got out of it was that becoming Starborn and going to another universe means leaving part of yourself behind, and a non-answer about the origin of the artifacts. Who created them? The creators! Who are they? Maybe I'll tell you one of these days. Otherus doesn't even mention the temples and the powers, the struggle for which is the actual cause of all the conflict relating to the Starborn. Like, why couldn't traveling to a new universe and infusing part of your essence into the fabric of the old universe be reward enough for becoming Starborn? Why did the creators also decide they should give the Starborn the ability to light people on fire? Before we go, there are some epilogue exhibitions, similar to post-game slides in other RPGs that explain what happened to the factions we joined, and the results of our choice in the main story. If we side with the Hunter, his philosophy spreads, and people in this universe become more ambitious as a result. If we side with the Emissary, they stay behind and let those they deem worthy enter the Unity and become Starborn. If we side with neither, the Unity is open to the public, and anyone that wants can become Starborn. We then get the choice. We can walk into the sphere and become a Starborn in another universe, or leave and go back to our own universe. If we go back, we get to keep the artifacts, so we can enter the Unity again later if we want. I guess this is where Aquilus' ideals are measured up against the Hunters. Sadly for Aquilus, going through the Unity means more content in New Game Plus, so we go through. Even if that wasn't the case, the alternative to going to other universes and building our power isn't staying behind and building something that lasts in our own universe. It's quitting the game. Though the Hunter's philosophy isn't much better. The main way of increasing your power in other universes is through intensely dull temple grinding, so maybe they're both wrong. When we pass through the Unity, we see a final vision of space that I can't quite figure out the meaning of. My best guess is that we're witnessing the birth of a new universe, implying that entering the Unity creates the new universe we're sent to. After the vision and the credits, we wake up on a Starborn ship, wearing Starborn armor in a new universe. Not really sure why we're given the ship and the armor though. At this point it kinda seems like the gifts the creators give all the Starborn are encouraging them to fight in this big battle royale. Why they would do this is unclear, but while I'm pretty sure the writers didn't intend for the creators to seem so sinister, they sure seem pretty sinister to me. In this new universe, we can do the main quest again, or we can reveal what we know to the members of Constellation, which gives us an abridged version of the main quest that's just pure artifact gathering. Sometimes there will be differences in the other universe's Constellation, like them all being killed by Zealot and Drazia, them all being killed by the Hunter, them all being killed by us, or them all being us. There are a couple of these, but disappointingly the changes are all limited to Constellation. Nothing outside of the Lodge is different in other universes. You'll occasionally get special Starborn conversation options where you waggle your eyebrows at the person you're talking to and hint that you know what's going to happen ahead of time, but you can't actually use your foreknowledge in any way to change how quests go. For example, in the Ranger's questline, you can't just tell the Marshal that the ones that attack the farm are mercenaries from the First, who are operating out of the factory, better known as the Factory, on orders from Ron Hope. You still need to play it as if your character doesn't already know how it's all going to turn out in the end. The only exception to this that I'm aware of comes right before the quest to visit the Scow. We can warn Vladimir that a Starborn will attack the Lodge and kill someone. He takes our word for it and lets us move the artifacts to the ship, meaning no one dies in the attack since there is no attack. Replaying the game as a Starborn makes very little sense. They really didn't consider all the consequences of the player character and some of the other characters knowing exactly how the story is supposed to go right from the start. I would recommend skipping New Game Plus. There's barely any new content, and what is there isn't worth a negative impact on every other story in the game. I feel like I've forgotten something. Oh, that's right, the music! What to say about the music? It's there, and it's competent. I didn't dislike it, and I can't think of any moments where it detracted from the game, but it really didn't leave a strong impression on me. I can't really think of any standout tracks, and when I listened to the soundtrack on its own, most of it just blended together. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind when a soundtrack is ambient and is just there to add to the tone rather than set it. But even then, the tracks should stand apart more to differentiate between the tones in different areas. And even the tracks that were higher energy and tried to invoke more of an emotional response didn't really succeed at that for me. They just kinda sounded generically orchestral. In conclusion, Starfield is a deeply flawed game, but while I'm not calling anyone's criticisms invalid, I'm a little confused why two of the most common complaints seem to be the writing and the gameplay. As you may be able to guess if you watched this far, I don't hate the writing in Starfield. I don't really love it either most of the time, but I don't really see how it's any worse than Bethesda's other post-Morrowind games. The main quest tried and failed to be more philosophical than Bethesda's other titles. and it did lean a bit too heavily on the premise of looking for artifacts, but is it really any worse than Fallout 3 and 4's main quests? Than Oblivion and Skyrim's main quests? Not really. At least the first playthrough when the player isn't a Starborn. I don't really think the writing and the side content is a downgrade either. The faction questlines, at least the Vanguard and the Crimson Fleet, were highlights of the story that I think potentially even surpassed the ones from Oblivion, and definitely surpassed the ones from Skyrim. As for gameplay, that's pretty broad. The combat is almost identical to Fallout 4, which places it leagues above Fallout 3, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Outside of combat, the leveling is really lackluster, the progression is bad, and the outpost building is pointless. So the gameplay as a whole has its ups and downs. The point here isn't to make Starfield out as a perfect game, the point is to try and identify where the flaws lie. The story and combat aren't worse than Bethesda's previous beloved games, so what sets it apart from those games then? Some would say it's outdated, that writing and combat like this was fine in 2011, but obsolete in current year. This assumes that games, or at least certain mechanics, get worse with age, a concept that I simply don't agree with, unless you're talking about pure visual fidelity. That's the sort of thinking that saw turn-based combat booed off the stage for the longest time, only for it to then turn out that turn-based combat wasn't such an outdated concept after all. To quote YouTuber Warlockracy, turn-based was fine in 1998, the year of Fallout 2. Turn-based is fine in 2023, the year of Baldur's Gate. Turn-based was embarrassing in 2008. Others will say all Bethesda games after Morrowind have been bad all along and Starfield has finally made people see the light. I doubt that's true. I can only speak for myself, but one game being bad doesn't retroactively poison my opinion of other similar games. I would say that while many other mechanics are flawed, the thing that truly sets it apart from the Bethesda classics and the thing they screwed up the most in this game is the exploration. They essentially removed the greatest strength of all their previous titles and replaced it with repeating, copy-pasted points of interest in dull, procedurally generated landscapes. In hindsight, it might have been better to only let the player land on certain spots on certain planets. These spots would be handcrafted, never repeat, and play more to Bethesda's strengths as a studio. Some players might compare it unfavorably with No Man's Sky and other space sims where you can land anywhere on any planet, but that comparison would be stupid. Starfield isn't a space sim, it's an open world RPG. Having a lower quantity of higher quality content to explore would be worth the loss of the ability to land anywhere. Though I wonder if this wouldn't just transform the game into scuffed Mass Effect. As it is right now, I would call Starfield okay. If you like sci-fi and you like RPGs, you might want to pick it up when the Game of the Year edition goes on sale in a few years. This has been Rom. If you liked the video, you can hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more in the future, you can subscribe to the channel. See ya.